there is a move to disarm Americans. I mean, I don't know how else to say this. They want to take our guns away to carry out their agenda, I guess we should say. So I'm a very strong believer in the Second Amendment, because without the Second Amendment, we cannot protect any of our other rights. So I believe that we need to have the Second Amendment in the top 15, because even though we feel safe that we got our constitutional carry, and we all know the Second Amendment people have been working on this for years to get it, we are still not safe from the ones that want to take our guns away.
I'm all for strengthening the Second Amendment, but it's going to be a hard sell without specific language. Like, what specifically do we want to strengthen?
Right. And that is something we need to work on the language. This is not by any means the end of it. We do need to fix that.
Mr. Chairman, may I speak?
Yes, please.
I'm the border person that's here, and so and I'm not the only one, but this was my language. I spoke this. It is not finalized language, but that's how we feel there, because we've been told by Border Patrol, DPS, lawyers, blah, 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 that we really have no rights. And so our guns are really going to be y'all want us on the front line with them? I'm just saying, when they come across the border, eventually they will, to take our stuff. You want us, we say on my road, we're 2804. 2804 is the line in the sand. So to me, that's going to keep Texas safe. And if you live where we live, they're coming to you, but they're coming through us. And so from all over the world. So it's really important to us. And I live by Uvalde, and I taught at Uvalde. I hate what happened at Uvalde.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I understand the sentiment, but how is this committee going to strengthen this that will make it worth taking one of our other legislative priorities? I get it.
This is the
We
Legislative
have to
Priority
strengthen
Committee.
it. I just don't know if any
They
of
are-
us know how, and maybe some of y'all do.
Each one of the
So
subcommittees are
speak
trying
up.
to
help us. What are the specifics of strengthening?
formulate their top
What's the language we need?
two.
I appreciate the sentiment. I think we'll work
to,
on perfecting
be in the
language.
final 15.
We have another
So that's what
full
you're
day today and then tomorrow. And so I'd like to entertain a motion. Anybody have a motion to adopt this? So moved. In a second. Very good. All those in favor of adopting the Second Amendment as one of the priorities signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? It's adopted. Medical freedom. Next on the list. Please.
Sean Sheeben, SD 15. Given the amount of support that this got from the SDs and the county conventions, this definitely needs to be in the top 15. One word of caution as we dive into perfecting language during the second half of our temporary committee work, I would urge y'all to avoid overly broad language as it relates to medical freedom. I believe that if the priority was narrowly construed that no Texan shall lose their job as a result of their vaccine status, it would get the most votes, top of the list, slam dunk. And that would give very clear guidance to the legislature. If somebody can read into the language that we're recommending that schools can't require measles vaccines for their students, this will drop down and potentially fall out of the top 8. So just be very cautious about the language that we adopt here. I would recommend a narrow construction to really target what those the submittals focused on that we saw, which was I think the vaccine mandate committee's work around preventing folks from losing their jobs. But if we go too broad, support will sink. So just wanted to throw a word of caution out around that.
Very good. Another comment?
There we go. Thank you. Just as our committee member just said, this is the most popular item from the SDs, and I'm going to assume over the next couple of days in testimonies, but it's very easy for us to inadvertently add a poison pill to this language and it gets shot down on the floor, even though it's something like this is what our delegates around the state want.
Very good. Please.
While we're talking about that, I understand that you want to make it narrow, but we're not the ones writing the law. And I do understand that if we make it too broad, that it's just going to get lost in the weeds somewhere. But the fact is that we need to have something as far as medical freedom. Whether we get the wording exactly perfect is actually moot, because they're going to do what they want in the legislature. We just need to say these are our priorities that have been passed to us by our SDs. So that one is, it's kind of down your line, Sean, but it has to go in.
There's always a challenge of our priorities being principally general in nature versus legislatively specific in nature, and it definitely is something we're going to have to hone in and discuss. Some might lend themselves to a general in nature phrasing. Others, as was discussed, might require more of a specificity in order for it to be clear to everybody and adopted. So I think there's room for both, not an either or, but a both and. So I believe because it's top, I'd like to entertain a motion to adopt medical freedom. Thank you. Need a second? Second. All those in favor? Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Medical freedom's adopted. Gender modification.
Second.
With the same kind of discussion on the language, we're going to need to be honed down and go from there. Motion to adopt. Second?
Second. I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. The next one is sex education.
Border security.
Okay, I'm sorry. Border security would be next. I think we've already heard a very passionate understanding for border security, kind of tied in with the Second Amendment as the comments were made, but open for discussion. Yes, sir.
I'd like to speak against this one mainly because it's out of our bailiwick. This isn't something that Texas can control. I applaud what the governor's doing. Our border security is an issue, but it's a national issue. And I would just say that this isn't something the Texas legislature can fix, especially when you talk about enforcing immigration laws and deporting illegals. So I applaud what they're trying to do, but I think from legislative priorities, it doesn't fit. And trust me, living in El Paso with 250,000 people appearing at the border in 1 month and half of them being released in the country, I understand the issue. I just don't think it applies here.
Very good. We're going to go this way, and then we'll come back.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect to my fellow subcommittee man, there are solid arguments that Texas can and should secure their border. We have border compacts that have been proposed. There are all kinds of tools that we are not using. So I think it's very important that we speak to border security.
Yes, sir.
I just concur.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Yeah, just to back on what Suzette said, the Texas Public Policy Foundation actually sent an opinion to the Attorney General in request asking what authority constitutionally the legislature or the governor might have. And what they said is that the Constitution in Article 1 says that only Congress can declare war. Say they're going to declare war
So I just want to update my committee members real quick on where we're at. Right now we have selected 8 of the top 15, and this is just 10 of the 30 items that we're looking at in our committees, our subcommittees. So if we add this is going to be number 9. Then we're going to have 6 more to choose from the other 20. So given that we haven't received any feedback from anyone yet on this, I don't want to put it in the top 15 just yet. I'm not going to say it's not important, because it is. And as the Texas Young Republican political director, we're having a border tour at our state convention at the end of September, and we already have like 6 congressional people going, trying to get the governor and Ted Cruz to make up and go to the border, because it is it's an issue that all parts of our party agree on. I just don't want to add it just yet.
I have a point of inquiry.
Yes.
Where did this fall in the submissions? Like with the people across the state, the delegates, like how did they rank this?
13 most popular.
Okay, like how many submissions were there on it?
How many total submissions?
Yeah, like how many, and like how many counties sent in? I'm just curious.
Yes, please.
Border security only?
Yeah.
As they're finding that, please.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to add that I think weighting it by the submissions are, I think that a lot of people feel like Hans feels, that Texas can't do anything, so we just have to sit back. I think we have to educate people that we have tools that we can and should be using. Our governor should definitely be dealing with this invasion at our border.
And I agree with that. The reason I'm asking for the information is because I wanted to see how much was turned in, because if we go out there and this is not in the top 15 and it was like a lot of people, we're all going to be in the hot seat. So that's why I'm asking that question.
So based on the statistics that are on his statistic chart, he shows 11 SDs and 13 submissions.
Number 7 in the list.
Number 7? Yep. Number 7 out of L. Okay, so it was in the top.
Mr. Chairman, can I comment on this? Totally opposite
Yeah, well,
of the guidance, but
We'll come quickly here, and then we'll go over there.
What you have to realize is, too, which I think a lot of people don't see the big picture, but this is impacting education, it's impacting healthcare, all of these other things that we are talking about, property rights. We just won a property right case, and it was for all of you, and they appealed it, so that's coming up, our county. Drugs, the list just goes on and on. Your crime rates in your cities are skyrocketing. My opinion is what's coming across us is fixing to explode worse than 9/11. That's just my opinion. But so it's not just, we got to use every method, and do we have all the answers? No, but I'm telling you that we have people thinking on it constantly. We're constantly with the governor's office, and Ken Paxton is one of our new best friends. But anyway, it is going to impact everything. And it's one of those, I think you said it, as Shelby, a while ago. What are the things that are going to be, this is going to be the one. This is how they're coming in. This is how they're taking over our country. And so medical care, you just name it. Everything at school. Electric grid, I have one electric company choice. 20 cents a kilowatt. They'll wipe it out. And that's almost all of West Texas. So I just can't stress enough how important it is. But anyway, that's mine.
Let's go this way here, and then we'll come back.
So the very first part of this is something that we have to have on here, because the cost to the state, to every one of us in this room, to every taxpayer in this state, for the education and medical alone would fund the budget twice over, probably. If you just stop and look at what we're spending on people that should not be in this country or the state, we have to do this. It's affecting our crime rate, our safety in our homes, in our schools. This has to be a priority because it's affecting us financially, it's affecting our safety, and it's affecting our sovereignty. We're no longer who we were because of the amount of people that are illegal in this country and in this state. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go over here, and then we'll come over.
We're talking about eliminating property tax. Here's one way to pay for it.
Okay. Yes.
Just because we don't have the answer to how to implement this in legal, defendable ways doesn't mean that it's not a critically important issue, and that we should, as Republicans, stand back quietly and just let somebody else handle it because we don't have the answers. We are the party that says these are the rules. We expect everybody to abide by the rules. It's either a law or a suggestion. They're breaking the law. There ought to be a way to enforce it.
Quick story. I have a good friend. Her daughter worked for Border Patrol or Homeland Security. Great insurance. COVID came. She was terrified for her children, so she quit her job and stayed home to take care of her 3 children. She's 32. She got breast cancer, no insurance. She goes to the hospital. The hospital is jam-packed with non-citizens receiving free health care. All the hospitals. She can't get free housing or Christian housing. She can't get health care for her daughter. She sold her wedding ring and her cars. So if we stop these subsidies of these people, we can help our own.
Mr. Chair, unless there's a opposition, I say we call the question.
Members, call the question. All those in favor of calling question? Aye. Opposed? I'll entertain a motion to adopt this.
So moved.
Move second. All those in favor of adopting the border security as one of the priorities signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Okay. So how many do we have total that we... 9 in that one. 9 of the 10.
And sex education.
Sex education.
Oh, I'm sorry. We have one more. Sex education. Please.
All right. So there does seem some logic in that this is a overlap of the one we talked about before, and so I think for that reason there may be some higher priorities. So it's just a comment.
Anybody else? Please.
Actually, I'd substitute with school choice for all.
So I was on this subcommittee and we did prioritize this. I do think that if we pass the other one, what was it? Obscenity obscenity, that it will take care of it. And I think if we put both in, it may confuse people. And so I would be in favor of removing this from the list.
Yeah, just to pile on, I intend to vote no on including this in the top 15 for now. If we come back at the end and we want to add it in, we can do that before we adjourn as a temporary committee. So.
There are an awful lot of people, parents, grandparents included, right now that are furious about this issue across the state. And it has gotten more attention and it has mobilized more people in the last 9 months than almost anything I've seen in the last 30 years. So this is something we need to take into consideration.
I want to say, I think if we do the obscenity one in the top 15 and we craft it in the correct manner about it being about the obscenity, but then add in something about the sex education, this will eliminate the pornographic materials in the sex education. I think that we can put it into one to where the delegates see that we're covering the whole entire thing, because I promise you, if you take that obscenity exemption away, these schools are going to quit doing that, because what is the thing that schools are the most afraid of? Lawsuits. And so I just think like Tammy was saying.
I would concur. I think if the idea of the obscenity, again, as I talked about, being the root, and we can give in order to and show the application of it, and that'll, I think, then have the delegates to show cause and effect in that language.
So in that vein, I think one of the things is the name that we put on it, obscenity exemption. A lot of people will not know. So if it's like hyphened with elimination sex education or something like that, that can be crafted. But I think that's going to be important for the delegation to understand, because when they don't understand something, they're going to skip over it and they're not going to vote for it. And we need to let them know that we are addressing it. So I think, but it needs to be kind of in the title.
Okay. Yes, please.
This one was one of the top legislative priorities to move through Senate District 14, which I represent, limiting sex education. And, when we look at what happened in Florida with the indoctrination of young kids and the law that passed to protect kids up to third grade from hearing gender identity, topics of conversation with teachers, and the desire to really reach our kids at a super young age so we make them more liberal, remove the values of the traditional family, have them look to the schools instead of parents for this kind of education, and that kind of slippery slope of just a little here, just a little there. So I'm in favor of keeping this where it is right now, and voting it into our top right now in this top 10. And I think it's important. I mean, obscenity exceptions are also important. I agree there may not be a way to put those together, but I do think that this is a hot topic, high value, very important for our parents.
Please hear, and then we'll go there.
Because if all we did was get rid of the obscenity exemption, then the sexual revolutionaries will figure out a way to still talk about sexual orientation and gender identity without it being obscene. Even talking about it, you can be very persuasive. There's persuasive to naive people. Books that are not obscene that can be introduced as curriculum. So I think we either have to keep it or we have to make it a hybrid. We have to make a strong statement that this kind of education, we want it prohibited. We just don't want the shield from lawsuits taken away. We want it prohibited by legislation.
Okay. Right here, and then we'll come back.
So, as to changing obscenity or adding something to obscenity exemption, I would suggest maybe on the lines of obscenity exemption, removing pornography from schools. As far as sex education, you're right. There are a lot of people that are motivated right now around the schools in getting something done. But I think we can continue that momentum without necessarily having this specific item in the top 15 or the top 8 when it gets voted on. I track all legislation, and we can keep them informed of any legislation on this effect, and we can also work on legislation even if it's not the top 8 individually on the SREC by rules. Individually you can be working that, and I can work with other groups for that effect.
Very good. Here and then there.
Mr. Chairman, I'm looking 5 years down the line. Whatever priorities we end up with here, they're not even going to be signed if they pass the legislature for another year. A lot of the things we're talking about here are critically important. We wouldn't have even thought of talking about them 5 years ago. These issues are accelerating, and I think we need to take a semi-long view about 5 years down the road to make sure that we're stemming many related issues which fall under one rubric. And while we have to keep and should keep, I believe, the resolutions single subject, that doesn't mean that the resolutions have to translate to just one bill.
I understand. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I agree strangely with what everyone has said, but what I'm most shocked at is the obscenity rule. That I didn't know the wording of that, and I think we have to make sure that we bold the end part of that. When we're talking about wording, we have to make sure that obscenity rule is understood. But then at that point, I think we can add the sex education as part of that. I think that's workable for this committee.
Very good.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to make a motion that this subject does not make the top 10, or it's not in the top 10 we're talking about currently.
This particular line item, this topic. Members, you've heard the motion to not adopt this. Is there a second? There is a second. So members, what's forced is to not adopt this into the top 15 at this time. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it. Yes.
And earlier I had said something about school choice for all when I first started.
Mm-hmm. What was the next one on our list? Okay. So the motion on the table is to substitute the sex education with abolition of abortion. We'll vote on that first. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
The ayes have it. So, members, we have on the table the abolition of abortion being considered to make the top 15. Open for discussion.
Okay.
Michael, which of the top ones that we have right now, how many of those were in the top 10 initially? Are we, in other words, are we satisfying our constituents?
Right.
Okay.
So of the ones that we've voted to include in the top 15, obscenity exemption was not voted that way by the submittals from the counties and the SDs, and that is it.
All right.
What about the where did the sex education fall?
It was top 15.
Okay, so when we combine the sex education with the obscenity, then that's going to bring that up into the.
I believe when we're done with the language and even possibly the naming of the item, either way, that we're
Yes.
going to be satisfying
Right.
the constituents in their input.
And-
We'll go with two comments over here. Yes.
John, do you have that other grid that showed how the SDs put up?
Summary statistics.
Yes, that one.
Okay.
There's a filter on the totals. There we go. Okay. Picture, picture. Just taking the filters off. There you go. Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to second something Ms. O'Donnell said, and I'm not a psychiatrist or psychologist, but I sometimes pretend to be one. Think about when you read a newspaper. If you see a headline and it doesn't grab your attention, you don't read the story. So I agree with the naming of these has to be really thought out and very important.
Thank you. I concur with that. Okay, members, as far as we've got right now 10, and then we have several additional ones that each of the subcommittees have entered.
No, we did not.
Oh, we haven't done abolition of abortion yet. Forgive me. We're still on discussion for abolition of abortion.
I tell you, I'm more confused about this than anything else on the thing. I agree with the concept I do believe in incremental movement, that we succeed overall, changing minds by incremental movement. I'm just concerned about how, yes, it is a life. Again, I can't argue that. But again, how Texas will be reflected, how the general public will look at this. And again, my compassion for the ladies that this is what they've been raised thinking. And so I think I agree with the issue. I think we're setting ourselves up for failure with the public. And that's my concern.
Okay, let's go down this way.
To counter that argument a little bit, if we want God to bless Texas, we have got to honor life. Mm-hmm. And so in situations of right or wrong, we have got to be on the right side of life. And so in that sense, I don't care what the general public thinks. I care what God thinks. You know, it's not even a matter of, is God on our side? We need to make sure that we're on God's side. And God is obviously for life. It's from Genesis to Revelation. And so, you know, there's so many issues this year that are new that we haven't had to deal with before, and that's going to put a little bit of pressure on us of what to get in the top 15. But we cannot take life out. If I think the time is right now more than ever for us to abolish abortion. And we heard lots of testimony about, you know, yesterday about abortion. And when we abolish abortion, when we make that a law, it's the greatest teacher there's going to be. And so we're always going to have a lot of people that don't agree with it, but that's not the issue. The issue is, are we going to honor life or not?
Very good. Let's go over here, Hans.
I agree with everything you said, and we need to make the statement, abolish abortion, and I think all the members will vote for it as one of the top ones. And let the legislators equivocate and play politics, but we set the goal, abolish abortion.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, my opposition to abolish abortion was not an opposition to having this one of the top 10, but to procedurally, you said initially we're going to look at the top 2 in every section, and then we changed the rules and made this one of the top 2. Mm-hmm. So
I believe
I think we can work on this at a later point when we reconvene to talk about the top 15.
Yeah, I believe that the motion that we adopted was that with the sex ed being eliminated from the top 2 of the subcommittee number 5, that we replaced it with our third, and we passed that.
No, that wasn't the motion. I had the motion to remove it. She then moved to add it.
Correct. And when that
the abolition. Okay.
Right. And so when she moved to add it with the sex education being eliminated, we adopted that. So I think the motion was put forward, voted on, and adopted. Right.
I cannot see this body not bringing abolition of abortion into the top 10 at the very least. I understand the electric grid is a big issue, but if we don't protect the most innocent life amongst us, I don't know how we can claim to be Republicans.
Okay, let's go over here, and then we'll come back.
I just want to speak about women in general. We know what we're doing. When you go get an abortion, you know that it's a baby. It's not a piece of tissue. I know we've been trained to believe that we just don't know and that we care about our rights to murder our babies, but we actually do know better. So please, let's not have sympathy for these people. They're in a bad situation. I don't know their personal situations, but we can abolish abortion and not insult or hurt the feelings of women.
This has gone to great
great strides to show the value of life. In this last legislative session, the Human Life Protection Act passed, the Heartbeat Act passed, the Chemical Abortion Safety Protocols Bill passed, the Alternatives to Abortion program was strengthened to $100 million for the biennium. Those are fantastic pro-life gains. Since its passage, the Heartbeat Act since September 1st has saved thousands of lives. The Human Life Protection Act is poised when the Dobbs decision comes down, which, gosh, I wish that would have happened before now. It would have made these conversations so much easier, to overturn abortion 30 days after that final judgment is rendered. We have that on the books. We don't need to call a special session. Nobody needs to make a statement. The reality is that if Alito's draft, and we don't know, anything could happen, reflects what the final will actually say, then abortion will be outlawed in Texas. We have other ways that we're looking at strengthening these laws, but the reality is that these are all on the books. Somebody erroneously mentioned yesterday that it's legal in Texas to mail chemical abortion drugs. No, we passed Senate Bill 4. It's illegal in our state. We've made great gains. The life issue obviously is important to me. It's what I do vocationally. I give my life to this work. I've always been strongly pro-life. But the reality is that from a policy perspective, the abolish abortion policy does not work. We cannot ignore the Supreme Court. Dobbs is overturned. Roe is overturned through the Dobbs case. Abortion is outlawed in Texas. If it's not, then that policy will not work. And the reality is that then we still have the Heartbeat Act in effect. We still have other incremental gains that we can make. But I've seen this discussed. I've seen the senators ask questions of those who come to testify. And they're very good questions, you know, about how do you propose that we do that? How is that going to work? How do you suggest that we ignore the Supreme Court? So from a policy perspective, it won't work. And I'll just leave it at that.
Please, we'll go here, then there.
Okay.
Yes.
If we are silent on this modern day genocide, we are complicit. In regards to it being a priority, if this were 1850 and our top priority would be slavery. If this were 1940, our top priority would be the Holocaust. And yet babies are still being murdered here every day.
I have something.
So there's a good little book that says, "Speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up for and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and the needy." And I would certainly say a child in the womb is someone who cannot speak for themselves. This was the most discussed issue here at this committee so far, and one of the most submitted in our SDs. I think it's easily number one because Republicans are about life. I do agree that, you know, we've had to have this incremental thing and stepping towards abolishing abortion, but let's pray to God tomorrow the Supreme Court comes down and throws down the gauntlet. Let's end this thing once and for all in our country.
I know that we are hoping that the Supreme Court does the right thing and does come out with the opinion striking down Roe versus Wade. But do any of us in here have a crystal ball and know that's going to happen for sure? We have made great strides in this state, more than I had ever thought that we would. And you know why we've made those great strides? Because 6 years ago, this committee put abolish abortion on the priorities list. It brought it into the forefront of the discussion in Texas, in our legislature, and made our legislators understand how serious we are about abolishing abortion and getting rid of it once and for all. I don't think this is the time to back off on this. I think it's the time to move forward and double down until we do eliminate abortion in our state.
Mr. Chair.
You go over here, this way, and then back.
We're not here to solve the problems for the legislature. We're here to tell the legislator what problems to solve. And with that, I will call the question.
Members, motion to call the question. All those second? All those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Members, we have on the table entertain a motion. All those in favor for adding abolition of abortion to the top 10 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. It's adopted.
Mr. Chair, I'd move for a 10-minute recess before we take delegate testimony at 10 o'clock.
Very good. Second, yes. All those in favor? Yes. Aye. Okay. Members, we're going to stand at ease for 10 minutes, and we'll be starting up at 10 o'clock with some public testimony.
And so the committee is going to recess for a bit while they get ready for more testimony. And yesterday was full of testimony. And what basically is happening right now is yesterday the committee, and unfortunately getting all of the technical specifications going was a little more daunting than I had expected, but we are I'm up and running now, and so I'll be broadcasting straight through, and you're not going to miss anything. Yesterday we had lots of testimony, and so one of the things that the committee had to endure was we got out of here a little after 11, probably 11:30. And they listened to testimony all day long. Senator Hall was probably one of the most poignant of those who came to share his opinions about what should be as a legislative priority, and several of them were very interesting. One of the things that I found, I think the statement that he made about election security. He said that security must trump convenience. And what he was talking about that was that there's only 3 reasons why anyone should receive a mail-in ballot. That is, if they're a member of the military, they're handicapped, or they're going to be out of state. He highlighted the fact that if you're 65, there shouldn't be some magic need to receive a mail-in ballot. And so his argument is we need to increase election integrity and which includes early voting, where early voting is extended and has no breaks. So, for instance, once it starts, it never stops, so that there's no time for typically you end early voting on a Thursday or a Friday. There's Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then Tuesday is quote unquote election day. Senator Hall is proposing just to have an election, and that election takes place in consecutive days. That way the computer, the information that comes from the polls cannot be downloaded in advance, which occurs now. So if you're familiar with watching how the elections move, or on election day when the polls come in, the polls close at 7, and you can check your election administrator's website, and typically you will see within 5 minutes the early vote count. And so they have already done that work in advance of Election Day. Bob Hall wants to stop that. He focused on gender mutilation, or modification, and mutilating children, that kind of thing. Get rid of that. Eliminate property tax. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that people came to talk about, in addition to abortion. Abolish abortion. Without question, abolish abortion took center stage. It is the most important issue for delegates. It's always been that way. This is, if you're a Republican, this is an important issue. And you heard members of the committee if you just listen to this and they're discussing, essentially, they're talking about the top 15 legislative priorities that they're going to present to delegates on the floor for their consideration, and then delegates are going to choose. And I think 6 or 7 of them are going to be selected. So whichever of those 6 or 7 gets the most votes are going to be the legislative priorities. So every delegate's going to be limited in the number of votes that they can cast for those 15 proposed legislative priorities. The committee, yes, as I said yesterday, worked in subcommittees. And they kind of scattered throughout. There were 5 subcommittees, and the chair recommended, and the committee agreed with choosing their top 2, so that they can start today with having 10 in the bank. There are 10 legislative priorities now, and we'll talk about those a little later and highlight what those are if you hadn't already seen what those are. But we'll make sure that you get those, and that's going to be key. And either me or my producer Adrian will post probably on chat what those are as well. But we'll get those up and maybe put them in the comment section as well, so to kind of give you a sense of where we are already, the top 10, and then they're going to add another 5. Doesn't mean that the additional 5 are going to be any less important. That's for the delegates to decide. But this committee is making strong recommendations. The ban on taxpayer-funded lobbying, school choice, that I think is probably one of the more interesting topics, because yesterday we did hear from individuals who were opposed to the school choice issue, but typically the school choice issue is in what I have come to learn is less about informed understanding of what school choice means, and there's a lot of innuendo and speculation about what school choice, the result of school choice on public schools and the impact that it will have. And the idea behind school choice is competition. That's not a bad thing. The government has a monopoly on education today, and it's tough to compete. That's why, and what I find fascinating is how few people understand that private schools may cost money, and my wife and I send our daughter to a private school, and that the teachers that are working for these private schools are paid nowhere near what a public school teacher makes. So why would they do it? There's a reason for it, because of the environment, because of the students, and because of the engagement with the teachers and parents. So these are issues, school choice, and then patient bill of rights. That was another hot button issue. These, again, all of these were brought forward by Senator Hall. And interestingly, we heard a lot of those. The patient bill of rights, I think, is one of the more interesting of them. I'm not sure if it's going to get on the legislative priorities, but I don't know why it wouldn't. This is one of those issues where we experienced families being broken apart during the COVID pandemic, and you had people literally dying alone in their hospital beds. And I can't imagine how the legislature or how this committee would not take that as a legislative priority. No family should be forced to be separated from their loved one, especially when they're dying. It's unconscionable. So it's an emotional issue, and I can't imagine. I had friends who lost their mom and dad to COVID, just days apart. And both of them, but the mother and father, they were married for, 50 years. The mother and father were put in different hospitals, so they weren't even close to each other when they died. And the family, they were kept away. So these are really tough issues. Let me just go through a few other ones. Election integrity, going to paper ballots as opposed to electronic. Medical freedom. The vaccine choice thing is an interesting one. It's a hot button issue in Republican circles because there are many people who are just anti-vaxxers, and I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I don't think that a person should be compelled to take vaccines, and that's, I think, the key, and that's where I think we get off the rails is when those who are advocating for who are advocating for the vaccine choice, they're actually advocating against vaccines, and they put a bunch of statistics about how what these vaccines do and what they don't do. The problem that I have with that, if I'm going to be objective here, is I look at the number of cases. Does a vaccine, could it have an impact on us? Yes, it most certainly can. I mean, that's the whole point of a vaccine. But can it have detrimental impact? Yeah, it can. But the overwhelming majority of population is taken care of and is helped from it. So it's an issue that I think it kind of goes. There's a term when I was working. When I was working in doing some work in D.C. and things, we called them black helicopter people or tinfoil hat wearers. The people who are just kind of off the rails. Don't take any vaccines. No vaccines. Oh, you get the flu shot. Oh my goodness, you're so stupid. Okay, maybe so, but pull back a little bit, and let's all get on the same page about okay. Who cares? I think the debate needs to move away from what vaccines, how they're going to kill everybody. And we need to be focused on the fact that it should be your right whether or not you want to take a vaccine or not. And you should not have and if you choose not to, you should not lose your job. An employer should not be able to discriminate against you because you choose not to take a vaccine. Or children should still be able to attend a school if they choose not to take a vaccine. Can we all agree on that? So let's talk about the things that we can focus on and quit talking about the gastronomical arguments that I hear being made so often. Okay, so in property tax, again, abolish abortion. Let's see. Again, I mean, equal parenting. Okay, that was an interesting one. Equal parenting came up, and the idea there is that men are kind of subjugated to the women when it comes to divorce issues. And the issue, I think, what was compelling for me to watch was when one of the members of the committee really took issue and said, well, we should be focusing on keeping marriages together. And while I agree with that 100%, the reality is 50% of all marriages end in divorce. And by the way, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. I'm a Christian. I profess Christ as my Savior, and I attended a Bible-believing church. And guess what? The statistics are no different in a church. So for Christians, so the fact is, divorce does happen, and okay, right, I agree. We shouldn't be focusing on we should be focusing on restoring and preserving the marriage, but we should be focusing on the kids. It's the kids who are impacted, and so parents make stupid decisions. I mean, marriage. My wife and I. We have a philosophy of our marriage that it's not to make us happy, it's to make us holy. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. And married for 27 years now, and it's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's the most rewarding thing I've ever done because my wife and I work at our marriage, and it's not easy. But the bottom line is when their marriage does fail, when one of them chooses to go gallivant and chase tail, what have you, it's the kids who really suffer. And so I think it was an interesting issue. I don't think it's going to end up being on the legislative priority, but it's an important issue. So we had a couple of people talk on that. Medical freedom, again, was one of the big issues. School choice, equal parenting, election integrity, property taxes. I mean, the property tax issue, without a doubt, was one of those hot button issues. We had multiple people talk about it. It seems to me, and it is a legislative priority. They did accept that as a legislative priority. Constitutional Convention of the States is also a legislative priority. It's one of those top 10. And so when I was looking at the platform proposals, I was surprised that there were Senate districts who actually are opposed to a Constitutional Convention of the States. And the arguments there, and I want to get my friends who are on the other side of that issue on the show, so we can have a robust conversation, because I think it's worthy of that kind of conversation. Will a Constitutional Convention of the States actually happen? Well, I'm not very hopeful about it, but I'll say this. I didn't think there was a chance on earth that we'd get constitutional carry. I didn't think that there's a chance on earth that the Supreme Court will rescind Roe v. Wade. But things happen. And just because we're so sure things won't happen doesn't mean that they can't happen. So I think keeping up with that is important. Property taxes, I think, without a doubt, this is something I think is doable. I think Senator Huffines, I hope to get him back on the show again, because he's got some good ideas, and gosh, I hope we can support what he's doing. He's got a foundation now that's kind of geared toward that. I'll be going to a function that's here at the convention. We're in Houston, Texas, at the George R. Brown Convention Center, and it is surprising, by the way. I want to highlight one thing. There is one senator, state senator, and one state representative that I've seen here who has actually spoken to the Legislative Priority Committee. And they are the two elected officials. The state senator is, no doubt, obviously, Bob Hall, and the other one is Brian Slayton. And these two guys, I've got their signs in my studio, as you know. Ironically, these are the only guys. These are the only elected officials who have been here so far. And should it be a surprise, these two guys are getting beaten up, not by Democrats, but by Republicans. But when they come in this setting, when they are with their friends, when they're with the fellow delegates, they're loved and they're respected. They've earned that love and respect, and they are lauded. And this is their place. This is why I suspect this is why you won't see some Republican state senators and state House members here at the convention, because this is the grassroots. These are the people who really care about the platform and about legislative priorities. Unfortunately, we have so many Republicans who mostly care about getting reelected. That's their only focus in life, and that's the reality, and it's a shame. What are we going to do about it? That's the idea. That's the call. All right. The ban vaccine mandates again. Abolition of property taxes. Abolition of abortion. And this person was also opposed to school choice. Had a pretty interesting back and forth on that. Election integrity, right to observe elections was the issue, and this is someone who said they wanted to be able to watch the count, and if it's electronic, you can't watch the count. So in other words, going back to paper ballots. Abolition of property taxes, abolish abortion, lots of that. Equal protection for the preborn. So in other words, if you abort a child, you can face criminal charges. I'm just curious, why is that a bad thing? Why is that outrageous? Because if you kill a one-day-old child, you will be you can be convicted of murder. But if it's 1 day from being born, just abortion. Like I said, this is the grassroots. We are the Republican Party. This is what it means to be a Republican. When you say you're a conservative, the only way you can say that you're a conservative, the only way is if you adhere to and uphold the platform. That's what a conservative is, the Republican Party platform. If there are things in the platform that you disagree with, okay, you're not a conservative. And so when people say I'm a conservative and run for office and are in office and they do things that fly in the face of the platform, you've got to ask yourself, are you really a conservative at all? Most are not, unfortunately. All right, I know I'm talking to the choir here, but the more we say it, the more other people may hear what we have to say. In Texas abolition or abolish abortion culture. Yeah. Okay. So there was interesting. The whole gender modification thing kind of took an interesting turn yesterday. I had a couple of speakers that really had some personal experience with this. A woman whose husband left her because he had transitioned to a woman, and another guy who was gay all his life and is transsexual or what. I don't know what it was. It was kind of all over the place, his comments, but ultimately the whole gender modification thing, this was their focus, that they were really concerned about children being able to do that. Well, something Bob Hall talked about. Let's end gender modification for a child. And one of the members of the committee said something very important. He said, it's interesting that a child can't own a gun underage. They can't. They can't even take vaccines. That's not something that they can consent to. They can't. A child under 12, I believe, cannot consent to taking a vaccine. The parent chooses that, but it's okay for them to change their gender. That's their choice. It's lunacy, absolute lunacy. And then we focused on. We ended with the policy director for Texas Values, and his focus was fair play in women's sports. Now, boy, that's a hot topic, isn't it? When we see men who are now call themselves women, and they are beating the women. It's kind of one of those things where you just kind of go that we kind of jumped the shark here. It's so ridiculous and outrageous. There are things that I go, people actually believe that? That's okay? When you saw a picture of this guy with the two women that he beat, that picture's gone viral. It's amazing that people are actually taking this guy seriously and giving him voice, and those who oppose what he's doing are the crazy ones. Beware, folks, of a day when evil will be called good and good will be called evil. We're there. And that's what being a Republican is about. It's basically saying, it's wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong. And that's why I'm proud to be a Republican, and I'm proud to be a Republican in the great state of Texas, because we do have great grassroots. This body here that you see assembled, these are great people. These are great Americans who really love their country, and they love what our country was and what our country can become again. And so that's why we're assembled. These are the members of this committee are from all over the state of Texas. And when you think about how far many of them have come, the sacrifice is not just their hotel rooms, which are going to amount to $1,200 minimum. It's not cheap here in Houston, Texas. It is also the gas, the outrageous cost of gas. So we're talking, some people are spending $1,000 in gas, or $500 in gas, I think someone told me. So these members of the committee are truly dedicated. So now we're going to listen to testimony, and so you're going to get a chance to see that today. So I'll hand it over to the chairman.
It's that simple. May cover the difference.
I'm going to write it down. Yeah, I know. Okay, members, we're going to get into some public testimony. A reminder of our delegates and alternates that we have a 2-minute time limit, 2-minute time limit. Then you will be open for questions. Teresa Beckmeyer is going to be our timer, and at 2 minutes, this giant gong will come out with a big hammer, and I'll just wish you the best. So 2 minutes, and then you will be able to answer questions from committee members. Yes.
Point of personal privilege. I just received a text asking me or someone or many of us to go testify in rules because there is a movement to get rid of the Legislative Priorities Committee.
What? Right now? Okay.
I just got the text. 10:12.
I don't feel threatened. You're not finna get rid of it.
Yeah.
We adjourn?
Yeah. No.
It's just across the hall. Should we go in mass?
No, it's 3:30. It's in 3:30.
What's that?
It's in room 330.
Room 330.
It's the next hall over.
Okay.
I move. Excuse me.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. What'd you move?
I moved that we recess and go to 3:30.
I don't. I'm against that. I think we should handle our business and take care of our business.
Could we maybe have some volunteers that would go over there?
Yes, that's right. You mean from the committee or just
a couple.
Yeah, if there's a couple, let's say 5. There's 5 people that would like to go over to there. Please raise your hand. Yes, go ahead.
I'm not making the motion at the moment, but I think it would be appropriate to recess and the entire committee go over there to make the point.
At this point, I would rather say that we just send 5 folks over there. Give us, if you come back and feel there's a need, that there's really some sort of a coup taking place, then let us know. With our electronic that we have today, we can be in just a moment's notice. And that way we can conduct the business that we were sent here to conduct.
In the alternative, I would suggest we adopt a resolution as the committee opposing that movement and designating these 5 people as representatives of the committee.
Already took off.
Your motion is for the 5 to go represent us?
Well,
yeah.
A resolution opposing this.
Oh, you oppose it?
Opposing what they're doing.
Oh, yes, that they're going over to oppose. Okay.
I'm saying we ought to have a resolution put in the record that we oppose it.
I see that we do a resolution in our minutes that we.
So moved.
Okay.
Why don't we wait till the 5 come back and report?
Yes, let's do that. Let's do that and wait for it. And or if they find out that they're going to get close to a vote or something like that, then we will definitely take that motion. So right now you're not recognized for that motion. We will go ahead and continue with our public testimony, and we will keep an eye on the fun of the of the convention. So the chair recognizes Joe Palmer. Joe Palmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate that. You didn't give me a chance to get nervous, so this could go really well. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. My name is Joe Palmer. I'm an SD 9. Yeah, I'd like to move it. I can't. Is that better?
Yeah, just kind of
All right. My name is Joe Palmer. I'm in SD 9. I'm a delegate. Along with the help of others, I killed $300 million in bond election proceeds put forward by the 4th Independent School District. I'm here to talk to you about elimination of property taxes, and I'm here to appeal to your good nature and ask you to include this as the very top of the list, as close to the top as you feel comfortable. The property tax system is an archaic, inefficiently levied, and impossible to fix system. And this is not my opinion only. This is the opinion of people who have worked inside that system, who have testified in front of the legislature in the past. The main reason I'm against the property tax system and in support of eliminating the property tax system in favor of a consumption tax is directly related to my family. My aunt has to pay the same amount of money to live in the house that she grew up in that my grandparents paid for the house in the 60s when they bought it. It is correct. We are renting our homes from the government. There is no home ownership in the state of Texas right now. Things are tough on people. I've protested my property taxes. They're not obligated to accept your evidence. We've attempted to fix the system. We've attempted. The consumption tax is a realistic alternative. And there is a study that's out there. It's on eliminatepropertytax.com. You can go look at it. A bill was filed in the 83rd session by Representative Lavender, representing Texarkana. Thank you.
Second.
Members, the motion to extend the gentleman's time. All in favor?
Aye. I appreciate it. I'm not going to be very long. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. I was listening to the committee early this morning, and it sounded like there might be a little bit of, not misunderstanding, but just lack of clarity on the possibility of a replacement of the property tax system. It's not going to mean a 20% sales tax. We're talking about a broadly applied consumption tax. It's going to be unpopular in the beginning because we're talking about taxing labor in some industries. We're talking about an 8% total tax on what you buy. And really, this is a more efficient tax. And there's no protest process needed. When I buy a candy bar, I'm consenting to the valuation of that item. We can't be taxing the ownership of a thing. It is inherently wrong. People are not able to pay. And the best example of all of why we need to do this right now is the skyrocketing property values. And I don't care what anybody tells you. I'm going to say it in this room. The appraisal districts are controlled by the local governments. If you look closely at who's occupying the appraisal review boards, it's people with connections to the school districts, the cities, and the counties. And the reason for the existence of a political party is the advancement of a commonly held ideology and ultimately in the implementation of law. We need you to protect us from the government. I'm not looking to the government to help me or protect me from anybody. Protect me from the government. Appreciate you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, sir. Questions?
So how would the elimination of property taxes affect things like special interest districts, like Gulf Coast Protection District, those type of things? Would it also eliminate it there, or can they still come back and add those taxes because those are unelected bureaucrats running these things?
Mm-hmm. It's an excellent question. And the beautiful part of this process is that we in this convention this week, and we as a party, we are tasked with communicating to the legislature the what. And the what is that we want to eliminate the property tax system, that we believe that the taxing of the ownership of a thing is worse than the taxing on a purchase of a thing. That's the broad idea of what we want to implement. So getting into the nuts and bolts of it, how it would affect this taxing entity or that taxing entity, we would advocate for the elimination of all property taxes and for the funding of all these local entities and all these entities that rely on property tax system currently, for them to be funded by a consumption tax instead. You're welcome.
Please.
First of all, I am in favor of what you're asking for. Trying to think it through practically. Of course, a couple of people recommended no tax at all, make them work with the money they've got, and that's an interesting idea as well. On the consumption tax, just like there's no way to control how much they value our property at, then you also would have to tie in something, say, what's the maximum consumption tax they can add. Then I guess you're saying the unpopular things may be a sales tax on your home, a sales tax on labor, a sales tax on things that we're not accustomed to having sales tax. But I guess, again, my question is, then what's to keep them from increasing 8% to 9% to 10%, et cetera, which then at some point you get to a black market. You get to where you say, you know what, I'm just going to pay cash this vendor and forget the tax. So how do you control this? I guess that's my question. How do you control the consumption tax limitation?
Sure. Well, I would start by saying, in response to paying cash to avoid tax, I'm much more concerned about what the government cheats me out of than what the people could cheat the government out of through occasional cash transactions.
The only thing there is you got to keep in mind, the government are the people and vice versa. Sometimes we put them apart from us, but we are the government. So we have to have our roads repaired. We have to keep things maintained, et cetera, for the good of all of us, and we use the government to do that. But they're not. It's not like us versus them necessarily.
I agree with that to an extent. However, when I'm sitting there in a hearing for the property tax or the appraisal review board hearing, I certainly feel like it's us versus them. And there's a myriad of other examples where I feel like the government is not looking out for me. But I do accept your point. I understand what you're saying. As far as how to prevent the increase of a sales tax versus preventing the increase of a property tax, this is an excellent point. Right now, there's a lot of deception involved whenever the local taxing entities are trying to pass a bond. They say no tax increase, and this is a lie. The reason it matters
now for them to say that.
School districts only.
Joe.
Well,
they can't hear you back there.
I'm so sorry. Are you talking about the ballot language that requires them to say this is a tax increase? Okay, that applies only to school districts, not cities and counties.
Okay.
I would love for it to apply to them too, but my point is that people do not comprehend the connection between their property taxes and these proposals that they are voting on the ballot. They don't think it increases their property taxes. I know this for a fact because I've talked to hundreds of voters. Presumably, we would want something in place legally that would require consent from the voters to increase their sales tax or their consumption tax, just like we currently have now. So I like this consumption tax as an alternative because people directly and clearly understand how this is going to affect them immediately starting today. Do you want to pay 2% more in sales every transaction? Versus do you want a shiny new stadium? It's not going to affect your property taxes at all. And if you're 65, it's not going to affect your taxes at all, which is also a lie. We take away all of that. We get rid of all that. We close down 254 appraisal district offices. No more pension. We're shrinking the size of government with this proposed solution. And that's what this party is about.
So we have a few more questions for you as well.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Have you been to Austin to testify at some of the committee hearings on
Several
this?
times.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is because this is where we need to go to get our legislators to take action. Coming here to these events puts it on the radar screen, but when we go to Austin, that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, and that's where we need to be testifying regarding the property tax elimination of that. This has been in the Republican Party platform for several years, and I've been up there to Austin many times advocating for elimination of property tax. But we're not getting the action. We're not getting enough groundswell of the taxpayers to come to Austin where the actual work is being done to get that to happen.
You have, okay, well, Senate Bill 2, Senator Betancourt's property tax relief bill, you had many people testifying. And I would say that many of those people, at their heart, would advocate for the elimination of the property tax system. But because you're narrowly confined to testify either in favor or against the bill that's in front of you, they're testifying, yeah, I want relief, I want reform. But if we put a bill in front of them that says abolish, those people would be down there testifying for that as well. We've got something like 20,000 people on our Facebook group, Eliminate Property Tax. The people are on fire about this issue. And this is the first step. Plank 178 is already in the platform, eliminate property tax system. This is the first step. We do this, then we get it in front of the legislature as a priority, and the party can advocate and commit resources, and then we will be there to support the party. That's how it will happen. I will be there.
Another question?
Question. How would the consumption tax be assessed? Would it be statewide? Or would it be like El Paso versus Dallas? Would El Paso have a consumption rate and Dallas have a different consumption rate?
We're interested in each of the local taxing entities funding their operations exactly the way they are now as far as the amount. We're not trying to cut anybody's funding for what they believe they need. I believe that's a mechanical question that's into the details of it, and I would leave it up to the committee to decide, but also the legislature to decide, because if this does go before the legislature, it's going to be us testifying, and it's also going to be all the king's horses and all the king's men. So it's a good question. It's
another question here.
What is your opinion of a value-added tax, where the tax is on the product through and it's an invisible tax?
It's hard for me to see that being worse than a property tax.
Okay.
Yeah, my advocacy is against the property tax system. So if people brighter than I am would want to consider a value-added tax, maybe that would be worth considering.
Another question. Sure. So again, I'm advocating for the elimination of all property taxes. I don't know how the elimination of the M&O portion, I have not heard from any of those people reassurance that the INS, the other portion of the property tax, would also be eliminated later. I think it's a half of a solution, to be quite honest with you. As to your other question about the retail-heavy counties, retail-heavy areas versus the rural areas with no sales, the reason they're calling this a consumption tax and not a sales tax is that it would be a broader tax than just sales. So presumably if you live out in the county, you live in the rural area with no retail, you're still going to have people come to your home and work on your air conditioner. You're still going to go to the mechanic. So those are things that would be taxed that are not currently taxed. And I would add to that that we don't believe that there is any form of taxation that would be perfect and perfectly acceptable to all people. I think that's impossible. But what I would say is you have to compare the injustices that are happening under the current property tax system to the inconvenience or the, more than that, the problematic issues that would arise under a consumption tax. You compare those two,
I would say a consumption tax still looks much, much better. People come out of those appraisal district offices, those hearings, crying. They can't live in their homes anymore. If you go to the courthouse, when they auction these properties off, they'll auction them off. They don't care if you can pay or not, because the person who buys your home for pennies on the dollar will pay. It's crushing people. It's killing people. People who rent pay property taxes. You pay property taxes when you buy stuff and you don't even realize it. The store you're buying things from, they're passing it right along to you. But I really appreciate your question. I hope I've answered it.
Sir, thank you for your time. I appreciate that. Members, for the sake of time, we're going to keep moving on to some other.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The chair calls Ryan Richards.
Thank you for recognizing me. Ryan Richards, representing Gaines County, SD 31, currently serving as Sergeant at Arms. So if there's any protesters I need to throw out, I could use the excitement. I just wanted to generally advocate for the things that we put in from Gaines County. I emailed every one of you a PDF of our 39 resolutions. Many of which are touching on the subjects that are being discussed from other counties too, like I would encourage you to look at the wording of the way we've worded ours, like in particular, like the Second Amendment ones. We propose that the state of Texas should use its 10th Amendment states' rights to protect our Second Amendment rights in opposition to the ATF using the Interstate Commerce Clause against the Second Amendment. And then furthermore, the state of Texas should nullify the National Firearms Act of 1934 and the Gun Control Act of 1968 within our borders, as they are an affront to our right to choose the weapon of our choice. Just the wording there, like the problem of what we're facing against the anti-gunners are using the Interstate Commerce Clause against the Second Amendment. So they're like pitting off two parts of the Constitution against each other. So, all right. So, and also, we very much agree with the previous gentleman on the elimination of property tax. This whole debate about, oh, where's the money going to come from? I mean, that's only partially legitimate because, like, taxation is theft, and I'm okay with the government starving and being forced to downsize. Yes. So, okay. Time.
Yes, for.
Sir, we were discussing the Second Amendment, a portion of your statement here earlier, and we desperately need your wording about pitting the different parts of the Constitution, the 10th, and then what things you think we need to repeal. Could you please get us that? We actually need that today.
I don't know if you received my email yesterday.
Thank you.
Yesterday, it's in the PDF.
In the PDF.
It's number 7 in the PDF.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Vote Ryan Richards at Gmail.
Question.
Although I very much share your sentiment about NFA, unfortunately, it's not within the power of this or any other state to nullify an act of the U.S. Congress. Go ahead.
It would be similar to what's happening right now with the suppressors, because the thing that they passed was basically made in Texas, sold in Texas, not for interstate commerce.
I'm familiar with that. The beauty of it is, number one, nobody has to go to prison. Number two, the AG's office picks up what are bound to be enormous attorney's fees. And if the courts follow existing case law, then that statute falls. But there simply are other ways to attack the enemy. And unfortunately, I could not support support nullification because that's very dangerous ground.
Okay. Part of that would be, not allowing the ATF to operate in the state of Texas.
But once again, you cannot prohibit them, but at the
Point
same...
of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Chair.
Yep. Sean Sheeben, SD15, I'd remind our committee members that the rules prohibit us engaging in debate with delegates testifying.
Am I
Yes, sir.
debating?
Yes.
I thought I was questioning the logic.
Sounded like a debate to me. So
Yeah,
point of order.
just to appoint members that we just engage in questions for that.
I yield back.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Chair calls Brooks McKenzie.
Hello, my name is Dr. Lewis Brooks McKenzie. Some of you have already seen me yesterday, and I've pestered you with emails and put fancy little cards with QR codes on your desks. It took me about 6 hours to figure out how to do it. Brief recap, I am an expert in attachment as the bond between a parent and child. I've served as the Assistant Director of Research for the TCU Institute of Child Development. I've worked with basically every nonprofit in this state that serves at-risk children, abuse, neglect, post-adopt, foster care. That is what I do. That is what I am an expert in. And I'm here to speak on the 50-50 equal shared parenting.
Sorry?
I'm here to speak on the 50-50 equal shared parenting that has come up. And one of the reasons is that I'm an expert in this area. And so some of the people that come up and are passionate are not experts. And I've heard many, many questions and they didn't quite know the scientific answer. I have that. Feel free to ask me. I've also brought a book that I will willingly give to any of you that talks about the parent-child relationship and the research done over the past 50 to 60 years. So if you really want to know, I can loan you this book and we can go through it. So I have the scientific basis for what I'm saying. I do not give my opinion, I give research-based answers. And what we know from this topic, it is absolutely imperative for a child to have a healthy, safe, secure, nurturing bond with both parents in all cases. I would never argue for a mother to be pulled out of a child's life, nor a father, because they both serve two very different purposes. I'm a late-in-life Christian. I knew research before I knew the Bible. When I found the Bible through my burning bush, I looked and said, oh my gosh, everything in there is backed by research who was done by academics who pretty much hate God because we're liberals for the most part in academia. So that and C.S. Lewis flipped me over the edge. So from a spiritual point of view, if I am the enemy, what do I want to do to break society? First thing I need to do is take the leader out of the home and the rest will follow. And we have seen that since the inception of no-fault divorce in the early 70s. We have seen the utter destruction of our families and our society. We have people... Yes, ma'am. SD1.
Other questions, please.
I move to allow more time.
Members, in motion to extend the time. Is there any objection?
Can we put a time limit, like a minute?
Another minute?
1 minute.
Extend for a minute. Any objection? So ordered.
All right, thank you. And also, I apologize for speaking so fast because it's like drinking from a fire hydrant. So that's why I speak like this. But it is absolutely imperative. And so for Second Amendment people, you don't want them grabbing guns. I don't want them taking my guns. So let's fix the root of the problem. These shooters come from broken homes, fatherless homes. We know the stats on fatherlessness. We call it a crisis, yet our system actually is probably the greatest promoter of fatherlessness in our state. We want the mental health people out of our schools. I don't want them giving mental health to my kid. I don't think they're qualified. I know they're not qualified. And so my argument against that is quit sending broken kids to school. And how do we do that? We fix them in the home. You want the drag shows? The people who are doing the drag shows, find me one that came from a safe, secure, nurturing home, let alone a Christian home, but just an intact home, and you won't find it because I also have a master's in clinical. I know psychopathology. So if you have an issue that has to do with broken adults, broken children, whatever, come find me. You have my contact information, and I will show you the research to fight the other side and give them their answer if they have the balls to stand up and do it.
Any questions? Please.
Dr. Belinda Morris, Senate District 13.
Yes, ma'am.
And we've heard a lot of testimony yesterday, and we'll probably hear more today about the 50-50 rule. I think most of us agree the importance of both a mother and a father and a family, and we understand the importance of the sanctity of marriage. And to be real honest, if you put as much time, energy, and passion into maintaining marriages, this wouldn't be an issue. So my point is, don't we need more availability of marriage counseling and family counseling to maintain the unity of the family versus dealing with, courts and judges and trying to influence judicial opinions?
Yes, thank you for your question. And if nobody's told you today, I love you in a very platonic, wonderful way, because that's a perfect setup. Absolutely. I've introduced resolutions. They're over in platform, but they're very wordy because it's a complex thing. But yes, absolutely. The judges can order anger management, substance abuse, mental health. I've never once, and I serve as an expert witness in custody cases, I've never once seen a judge order 6 months of counseling. Not once, not a single time, even when it's been asked for by one side. And so we don't do anything to promote that, and I absolutely agree. And I've got some stuff over in platform that addresses that. But yes, instead of incentivizing and making it so easy to toss marriages, if we just put and you can't legislate morality, but what we can do is say, okay, there's a 6-month cooling off period. How about you guys figure it out? And if we take away so many of these incentives, because quite honestly, if I go and make false accusations, I win and I get a bunch of stuff. But if we take that stuff out, people will often cool off, and then a child grows up in a home where they've seen the parents work through something, that marriage is stronger. And I absolutely believe in everything that you said, and yes, I do have answers to that, but I can't write those out because I need a one-line blurb to come in here, but I absolutely have that. Yeah, I believe we should strengthen those families and marriages, and we have no programs whatsoever that do that.
One last question.
You had spoken, I read your work that you sent us.
Yes, ma'am.
PDFs, here's a couple of them, including one about that. You had talked about judicial immunity.
Yes, ma'am.
And I'm not quite certain what you mean by that and is how important that is.
So the judicial immunity in the context of the family.
How important that is.
So the judicial immunity in the context of the family court, but it's also in the context of all courts. Judges have immunity that while they're doing anything from the bench, so a judicial act, something only a judge can do, they are covered by what's called absolute immunity, meaning I can violate your civil rights and there's nothing you can do practically. I can commit a felony from the bench and there's nothing you can do practically. And so that immunity covers them, so when they have egregious, unlawful, and unconstitutional behavior, there is nothing you can do except for a process that really does not work. And so in the family courts, it is widely known that the Constitution is violated, due process and things constantly on a basis, but it also affects every other issue. Judicial integrity, vaccine mandates, you name it. If you have an issue and it's going to go before a judge, if I'm an activist and I don't agree with you, I'm going to gender mod that kid because I think it's okay. And I can't get prosecuted. I can't get civilly sued. I can't get anything. You can just hope that an impeachment occurs in the legislature, and it hasn't happened since the 60s, according to Representative Leach.
Thank you for your testimony, sir.
Thank you.
Chair calls Dale. Sorry,
just a point of personal privilege. The Rules Committee has killed that amendment. So the amendment was to reduce the number from 15 to 10 to come out of this committee, and then on the floor, reduce it from 8 to 5 that our delegates pass. So that was killed, but we do have some spies, if you will, in there that are going to let us know if and when an LP rule comes up again, and we'll address it then.
Okay, thank you for that report.
Thanks for your work.
The chair calls Dale Holes.
Thank y'all very much for having me. After spending a couple of days in here with y'all, this is a very depressing committee to be in. I'm sorry. And I'm afraid I'm not going to help alleviate your pain here. But I just want to talk to you today about our country, America. We know that something's not right. We see it on the news every day. We see BLM, Antifa, rioting, burning our streets. We see thugs pushing people in front of trains. We see people knocking old ladies down on the streets. Gangs of young people shooting it out in the neighborhoods. Cops being killed. Abuse everywhere. What is happening to our country? These are things that you look at and you go, my God, is this the country we grew up in? Or was it like that when we were young? The answer is no. What is going on with us? So I wanted to look at that, and I see that we have an issue here. And it's not, so much the laws that we have. It's our failure to abide by them. We are raised, these people who are doing this stuff, they're not aliens. They don't come from another world. They don't even come from across the border. They're our children. They're our youth, our young people. They're out there doing this. So why is this happening? We have Sandy Hook, Parkland, Columbine, Santa Fe, Uvalde. Those were done by broken children. So what is the answer? I heard somebody recently say, why would God allow that to happen in these schools? Well, you know what? When you kick God out of school, this is what you get. Last legislative priorities y'all had at last convention, you had religious freedom in there as one of your priorities. That was a good one. We fought for it, got some minimal stuff done. But you know what? It's already time. Oh, jeez. Okay.
Second. Members, you heard the motion. Any objection? Chair is none. You have another minute.
Thank you very much. I'll get right to the point. You have plank 132 in there, religious freedom for public schools. You need to make that sharpen your point and make that a priority. We have to get God back in our schools. If the Supreme Court says no, step around them. We're Texans. We ought to run our own state. We ought to run our own schools. We got to protect our children the best way we can. I say we bring it back, we make it a priority, and we tell our legislators, just like we told them against abortion, Roe v. Wade, after 50 years of murder of our children, we can do the same to protect our children in our schools. We're tired of CRT. We're tired of the LGBT plus agenda. We're tired of mental health and psychotherapy and chemical medications. We need to get God back in our schools. We need to raise good, righteous people again, because that's the only way our system is going to work.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? We're going to go SD3, and then we'll come down here.
Okay. SD3.
SD1.
And excuse the way I'm going to ask this question, but I'm an attorney, and this is the way my brain has been trained.
Okay.
And am I right that the Constitution is a limit on the powers of the federal government?
Yes.
And is schooling or education mentioned anywhere in the Constitution?
No.
So wouldn't it be accurate that the federal government should have no control over our education system?
That would be a reasonable interpretation. I agree.
Thank you.
SD11.
Dale, thank you for your comments, and I appreciate your passion. My question is, what do you suggest that we, the people, do to bring this situation of a godless nation to its knees?
Okay, you got to start somewhere. Right here in this committee, you decide what the priorities of the Republican Party are. If you think this is a serious thing, if you think this is important enough, you should add it to your priority list. You should make it one of your top priorities. That is where it starts. Then, as was said before, we can take this and we can go to our legislators and we can start working on them to change the laws and get things back started. We have to educate our people. We have to make sure that we are out there saying what we're for, not what we're only against. Yes, we're all against CRT. We're all against an LGBT plus indoctrination in our schools. We're all against that. But what are we for? We ought to be for righteousness and morality and goodness. We don't put that out there anywhere. We need to have a voice in that. That's how we started.
That's right. Thank you.
Question. have a question.
Yes, please.
So you're wanting us to put have a priority for put God back in schools, correct?
I have a priority written for you guys, if you want the language, and it is religious freedom in public schools.
Okay, religious freedom in public schools. Okay, so I'm curious. So what if my kid goes in and he has a teacher that is a Muslim?
Okay.
I would not want my child being taught the Muslim religion.
I'm not saying that teachers should instruct children on their religious education. That's to the parents. That's to the pastors. That's what they need to do.
Then how do we put religion back in the school?
Well, we stop the censorship for one thing. We stop the school systems from every time a coach kneels on the ground to say a prayer for a victory or even a loss, he can get fired in this country because he cannot exercise his religion. We can't say a prayer in the cafeterias. You know, a teacher can't because it might be construed as a church. That's ridiculous. We need to stop the censorship in our church of our religious community. Some places, you're not even allowed to wear a cross and display it. We need to get God back in there. That doesn't mean we preach to him.
And I'm not disagreeing with you.
I know.
Just looking at the other side here.
Yes,
because
ma'am.
that's what happens. They take our stuff and then they go the opposite direction.
Right.
So what if we start having, which I'm from a small school, they still allow all that stuff. I think a lot of it's up to your school board. I think they can choose to go against the grain and say, we're going to have this. But my concern is if you make a law with this and it's very broad, then what if we have satanic worshipers that get out and start doing their stuff before a football game?
Well,
I mean, there are consequences to this when you make a broad statement like that, and that is my concern.
I know, and that's usually used to say, well, if we let the genie out of the bottle, oh my God, there's all kinds of bad stuff going to happen. Listen, Satan worship is not religion. It is a perversion of Christianity. It is somebody who is, because even Satanists understand there is a God and that they are worshiping the devil. They are the Antichrist. So I do not accept that argument for that one. I think that school boards, though many of them lack courage, can stand up and say, well, this is what we're going to do in our school system. I'm depending on you, Teresa, and you, Suzette, and you, Scott, and anybody else on here to stand up and be a start of this and say, you know, what's the alternative? To raise a bunch of godless children that are cultural Marxists, that are indoctrinated in LGBTQ, that don't recognize our norms, our founding principles? We're not raising good people anymore. We're raising bad people. And that's our fault. It's not their fault. They're only doing what they were taught. It is us who have to stand up and make a stand.
Sir, thank you for your testimony. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Chair calls Wesley Thomas. Wesley Thomas.
Sober and rules.
Chair calls Sarah Bailey. Sarah Bailey. Chair calls.
She's coming.
Oh. Yes. And Stuart McMullen is going to be on deck.
Hi, my name is Sarah Daly. I am an activist for childhood cancer, parental rights, medical freedom.
Start over.
Yeah, start over.
I'm sorry. My name is Sarah Lindley Bailey. I'm an activist for childhood cancer, parental rights, medical freedom, and so much more. I have lived every parent's worst nightmare. I lost my child's cancer, and I, as a parent, had no rights. We are talking about parental rights throughout this whole issue. Yet I don't see anything about cancer. Your child can be medically kidnapped just because you don't want treatment, or you want to go to a different hospital, or you're diagnosed with Munchausen by proxy, because They want your child to go through cancer treatment, and you have no right. You can't even sue because no lawyer will take it because of tort reform. There's a cap of $250,000. No lawyer is going to go against that whenever they're fighting against a $10 billion industry. So tort reform is not for the parents whenever there is neglect. And there has been neglect. A lot of people in my situation want to speak out, but they're afraid of CPS going after their other children. I'm in the unique situation where she was my one and only. So I'm fighting for the voiceless, and that's what y'all are doing too. Y'all are fighting for the voiceless that are unborn, but what are y'all doing for the families that are fighting and have no voice? And yet there's no laws or no support. People go into depression, PTSD, people lose their jobs. I can't work. I worked with children all my life, and I know children, and I am so good at it that I cannot stand looking at a child that looks like her or the name Taylor. Thank you so very much for your time.
Questions?
Hey, Sarah, it's good to see you. I was heavily involved with Sarah when her daughter got her diagnosis. We found a clinic in Boston that had a 50% survival rate. But Texas Children's had, was it Texas Children's or?
We went to Texas Children's first, then MD.
When they had done the diagnosis, if your child is under the age of 18, you are stuck. They own you. You can't go anywhere else. And of course, they had a grant for some experimental medication, and her child was their golden goose. And Sarah lost her child in a few months. They threatened CPS. It was one of the most heartbreaking things I've ever been through. And we thank you for being here. It took a lot of courage, Sarah.
Thank you for all your support, too.
Question here, and then we'll come back on.
Okay, ma'am, are you saying that, or are you saying that this experimental drug was forced on your child?
So, long story short, once we got the diagnosis of ATRT, which is extremely rare, only happens to 30 children in the U.S., and unfortunately, we found 3 other families in the greater Houston area diagnosed the same year. So ATRT is extremely rare, and needless to say, we went to Texas Children's first because I had no choice. We were at one hospital, and then we were transferred, and I was like, I don't want to go here. Well, you really don't have a choice in the matter, was what was repeatedly said. The SJRT for ATRT was terminated because it had 2 trials that didn't have very much success. So I wanted to go to out of the country for a different treatment. I was told by a lawyer that if I lost my child and came back, I would be processed and arrested for medical abuse or medical neglect. So yes, all these different trials are forced on cancer patients.
Question.
I might have gotten lost in your testimony, so I want to make sure I'm clear on what you're asking us. Is it a request for a legislative priority for medical freedom? Or I know you mentioned tort reform. I just want to make sure I'm clear on what your goal is for this today.
There's so many different issues that need to be addressed, and they both need to be priorities, because tort reform doesn't give it doesn't hold anyone responsible. And there was very much negligence, and no one would take it because of tort reform. So even if we bump it up to $500,000, I'm not the greedy type of person. But like I said, I can't work. I don't know if anyone can work after they lose their children. But long story short, tort reform needs to be addressed, as well as medical freedom, because it needs to be happening.
One more question.
I'm also getting from your testimony that you're advocating for parental rights as well. Is that true?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Parental rights.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Chair calls Stuart McMullen with Wesley Thomas on deck.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me all right? My name is Stuart McMullen. I'm from Senate District 24, Williamson County. I'm here to talk about equal parenting. I currently have 50-50, but it took 6 years, 37 court appearances in Williamson County, and 2 years in federal court, along with thousands of dollars and thousands of hours of preparation and court time. Yesterday, there was a lot of testimony for equal parenting, and so there were some questions about what does that look like. My current situation is we do week on, week off. It's Monday to Monday. One parent drops off at school on Monday, the other one picks up that afternoon on Monday. There's many different ways to split time equally, and since we have come to a 50-50 agreement, our son is much happier. He's doing better in school, and we're able to work together, have birthday parties together. But I will say that equal parenting is not for every situation. Both parents have to be fit. Both parents have to be willing to have 50-50. Some parents just don't want it, but for the parents that do, they need to be willing to have it, and they need to be able to have it. So you have to live close enough to make it work, or your work schedule needs to be conducive to it. Like I said, this is not for everybody, but it should be the starting point for every custody dispute. And then you just adjust the schedule based on the child's needs from there. And I will say this, that the Republican Party of Texas believes that in a strong family unit to stay intact, and that's the best situation for any child. And I do agree with that, but right now the current family code, it incentivizes divorce because of the way it's written. It's a winner-take-all situation. You have one parent gets the main custody, and they get usually child support. So it incentivizes one parent to not want to stay in the marriage. I believe that if 50-50...
I move for an additional minute.
Remember, you heard the motion second. Any objection for extending gentleman's time? Your chair is none. You have 1 more minute, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I believe that if 50-50 was the starting point and in the family code, that would disincentivize. It would actually incentivize the parents to work together to work it out, because there's no longer this carrot sticking out there where one parent thinks they can leave, get the money, get the house, get the kids, and the other parent becomes a visitor to their own child, which most of the time that's the father, which leads to the fatherless crisis that we have in America right now. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Any questions? Yes, please.
ton of studies out there. There's a ton of doctors, Dr. Warshak, Dr. Nielsen, and I'm sure Dr. McKenzie can give you a lot of other ones. I did hand out, but yes, there's a lot of empirical data out there that shows equal parenting is what's best for children of all ages, not just older ages, but of all ages. I did hand out one of these to every one of y'all. There is a QR code in there, has a video, and it shows some of the statistics of fatherless homes. But there's also studies that show statistics of children that grew up in equal parenting situations where they benefited in the long run. As a matter of fact, there's one statistic that shows that children who came from equal parenting situations are less likely to get divorced as adults.
Very good. Another question.
I just want to make sure I understand. You and the other people who have spoken on this topic, you're not saying that that's the end-all be-all, that the judge has to give 50-50. You're saying that should be the starting point as opposed to one parent over the other.
Right.
Accurate?
That's correct. The Family Code currently states that up until last session, it stated that the standard possession order was in the best interest of the child, which yields about an 80-20 split, which we know that's not due to the research. We've had a 40-year research experiment on our children because of the Family Code. Senator Pat Hughes filed a bill last session which made the expanded standard the new best interest of the child, which is about a 60-40 split. It's almost, but it's not there.
Thank you.
I have time for one more question here.
So
let's go here and then we'll go. Go ahead.
in last session, the bill that he filed, did it pass?
Yes, it passed. It became effective September 1 last year, 2021.
Okay. Thank you.
Go ahead.
My family has basic expanded on my stepsons. Excuse me, what's it called? Expanded standard. And I figured it up down to the day, and it was 48.52. So we're arguing about 4%. And what happens if we go to 50-50 custody to these mothers? Do they lose their child support? Is that what this all boils down to, for just arguing over 4%?
Yeah, good question. I also broke it down by the hour, and a lot of times you got to do a 2-year average, because 1 year you'll have spring break and the other year you don't. So that affects your percentages there. And you can't count Friday at 6 o'clock to Sunday at 6 o'clock as 3 days. That's only 2 days. That's 48 hours. The Texas Family Law Foundation likes to count that as 3 days, which is probably where that discrepancy comes in. But it's on a 2-year average, it's about a 60-40 split. It's nowhere near 52-48. And I'll be happy to show you the numbers. I ran mine off of the Leander ISD school calendar, and I've got it from the past about 8 years. So to answer your question about child support, the bills that we've pressed do not even address child support. The judge has broad discretion to still order whatever they're going to order. This only deals with time, and that's what children need, is time with both of their parents. The current family code doesn't allow that.
Thank you for your testimony, sir. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Chair calls Wesley Thomas, and Jeff Morgan is on deck.
Two minutes?
2 minutes.
All right, I'll set my timer here. My name is Wesley Thomas from SD3. It's great to see you guys again, and a lot of familiar faces on the committee. I had a bunch prepared last night, but then I'm throwing it all away. I'm just going from my heart here. So I'm a father of 5. You might see one of my sons walking around with me here. We like bringing them to convention. If you guys have children, I'm sure you have the same story as I do. My children don't always treat each other kindly. Have you ever had that problem? So, you know what I tell my children, as I say, I try to teach them the golden rule. I try to say, hey, are you treating your siblings the way you want to be treated? That is what the golden rule is. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I think we should do the same thing here in this committee and in the Republican Party at large. When we craft our priorities, when we craft our platform, we should be asking ourselves that question. Am I treating my neighbor the way I want to be treated? And with regards to abortion and protecting children, are we treating the preborn the way we want to be treated? That's why I'm advocating for equal protection. And the language in this pamphlet, which you've all been handed already, and I'm sure my son will be handing out more of them to you throughout the week because he loves handing them out. This language follows the golden rule. It simply says that we treat preborn children the way we treat the born. And that's what I'm asking you to think about as you craft the final language for your report. If there's anything in the language that you would not want to apply to yourself, then it doesn't belong there. Treat them like human beings. Treat abortion the way God treats it, which is murder. We need to call it that, we need to treat it that way, and we need to hold those accountable who seek to murder preborn children the way you would want people to be held accountable if they sought to murder you. That's what it means to love your neighbor. Thank you so much.
Thanks, sir. Questions? Questions from anyone? Seeing none, thank you so much. The chair calls Jeff Morgan with the Luke Macias on deck.
Hello, my name is Jeffrey Morgan. I am from Senate District 2, and the legislative priority that I would like to see focused on is the repeal of unilateral no-fault divorce. Last time we met, we got the wording changed from no-fault divorce to unilateral. Why is that important? Because unilateral divorce is divorce on demand. It's forced divorce. It's actually, if you go back historically, that which Vladimir Lenin advocated and pushed for in the Soviet Union. His underlying philosophy was destroy the family, destroy society. That is our law in Texas. Now, a lot of these issues that have been talked about, I agree 100% with them, but I still think that the idea of unilateral no-fault divorce is the tree we need to be striking at. If you are pro-life, you should be for the repeal of unilateral no-fault divorce. Reason being is that once you lose that support system, daughters are more likely to get pregnant, engage in sexual activity, have abortions. Civil asset forfeiture. Ma'am, you talked about child support. If my wife wants to leave me, why should I be punished with child support? Or if I'm a woman and the husband wants to leave me and I'm the bigger wage earner, why should I be punished with that if I want to keep the marriage together? It is a big religious liberty issue as well. This case right here, we filed with the U.S. Supreme Court. It's Pankow v. Pankow. You can look at it at the U.S. Supreme Court, the search docket. And it talks about the issue not only of the 14th Amendment violation, but of religious viewpoint discrimination. It is viewpoint discrimination. When somebody says, my marriage is insupportable, and the other person says, I don't believe it, and the judge says, well, I have to do it because she says so or he says so, that is a viewpoint discrimination against another person. I would also say this for the people that, my friends, okay, thank you.
Members, are any questions? Right here.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. I fully agree that we need to protect the family institution, and I had, until very recently, thought that the main impetus or behind a no-fault divorce was a bad idea. Just say, oh, I want out, and that's it. I was speaking with somebody very recently who mentioned the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, and unfortunately there was no media outlet I could recede to and not hear about that. Mm-hmm. So I think we're all familiar with it, but the question that was posed to me is, okay, if you make the barrier to divorce more difficult, what incentives are there to fabricate things in order to get out, to stage things, especially in an era of Me Too.
So let me go back. The first thing was Ronald Reagan was the governor who signed this, and he said it was the biggest mistake of his political career. Mike Huckabee said it's the worst thing that has happened to America. Now, what you've said as far as the fabrication, go to any family court today. Perjury is rampant. It has not decreased lying. When somebody says, my marriage is insupportable, they don't have to give any proof. They can make an allegation. And often, no-fault divorce, the way that it's done in Texas, if there is a person who's beating somebody, that person should be facing some type of criminal liability, perhaps, rather than saying, oh, my marriage is insupportable, and he or she gets off scot-free. So the idea of perjury, it's rampant right now. And that's why when I know Brooks McKenzie, when he talked about some of the things with judicial immunity and everything, that's one of the big problems is that, you know, I've been to over 100 cases. I've watched this stuff take place. Perjury is rampant. It's never punished. It's often rewarded. It's incentivized. And when it comes down, my perspective is with my friends who are advocating for 50-50, if you have unilateral no-fault divorce, if you have no-fault divorce, the presumption should be 50-50 because you've just said there's no fault. So why are you trying to find fault with a parent right now?
Is that to say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, is that to say that the problem of perjury and fabrication of stories is already an issue in the quest for a bigger share of the assets and the children in the divorce? So it would just kind of be moving the air bubble around.
Well, I believe that, but I also would say this is a due process issue. I mean, if somebody wants to, does marriage have any legal protection in the state of Texas? Is it a contract? Is it a covenant? Is it something you've done before God? Is it a religious liberty issue? Absolutely to all of these things. And I'm sorry, I kind of forgot what you said at the very beginning. I usually write something down. But the issue right now is, marriage is not a prison. If somebody wants to leave, he or she can always leave. But they should not be rewarded for leaving that situation when there is no fault. If you allege no fault divorce, if it's mutual, you protect due process for both parties. Unilateral means one person says, I do it, and it is a lawsuit, and you as the respondent can never win.
Sure, we have another question here.
Sure, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question. I hope I answered it.
Sir, thank you for your time, but I want to give you an opportunity to clarify something you said, which was, if you didn't want the divorce, why should you be punished with child support? I don't think any of us think that child support is punishment for the parent. We're looking to protect that child if the marriage dissolves.
The best protection for the child is to be raised not in a 50-50 situation, but in a 100-100 situation. And as many people have said, we can't strengthen marriages. Even Democrats know this. Leah Ward Sears, Democratic Supreme Court Justice, said at least 40% of marriages could be resolvable. Other people have said even higher. Family court judges, we do not allow this to take place. And if you're going to, first off, take my legal rights from me, I'm a married person, now you're going to make me single, and now you're going to take money from me. I'm willing to, you can always do a private agreement if you want to or something like that. But I know people that have had to sell their house to pay the spouse's attorney bills. And they end up in jail because they can't pay child support. I think that we have a problem. And once again, you look at the other problems that we've talked about, a lot of these problems come right down to unilateral, no-fault divorce. It is a big, big issue.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. And if anybody, I did give you the Rockwall Reagan thing. If anybody would like it, I've got additional ones here. And again, Panko v. Panko is a Supreme Court case. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Chair calls Luke Macias with James Collison on deck. Yes. Yes, sir. Yes, the question is this a relative? Yes, this is my son.
Yeah. He didn't call up Lukey Macias, but he called me that when I was growing up. I'm going to try to be quick, guys. I just have a couple things I wanted to talk to you about real quick. Thank you for all your hard work for the last couple days. On the gender modification legislative priority, I did want to bring up the fact that currently there's no language in there that also applies to the therapy that these children are getting. These parents start abusing their child as early as 2 and 3 and 4 years old, taking them to therapists who then they answer the wrong question and they start trying to turn a little boy into a little girl or a little girl into a little boy. So it's really important that these licensed psychologists in the state of Texas, we literally give these people their licenses and then we empower them to go emotionally transition children all across Texas. There's thousands of kids, way more are getting emotionally transitioned than are actually getting the surgical removal. Also, those surgeries, ultimately, as long as we still protect parents, that's either by calling it child abuse or at least in the language considering adding something where we don't believe that medical professionals or parents should be engaged in these activities, because the importance is that parents can still get their children the therapy from a therapist that's not in the state of Texas. Even if we told a Texas therapist they couldn't transition them, they can still fly to another state to surgically remove that child's genitalia. People fly into Texas for surgeries as well. So if we actually want to make sure that children are not transitioned, we have to make sure to include in the language things that apply to the parents. When it comes to the obscenity issue and the porn in schools and the libraries and the sex ed, I do think that that should be considered as one legislative priority, as stop sexualizing Texas kids. I think that there's an opportunity. I think the delegates would very clearly understand what that is, and they'd probably vote it as a top priority, but there'd be a way of actually bringing several of these in. And then the last thing I wanted to talk to you about is banning Democrat chairmanships, which is not currently on the top 15. I think it's a really important thing to put as a legislative priority, and I'm just going to give you 3 very quick.
Motion to extend 1 minute.
I don't recognize you for that, no. Sorry. There's a motion to extend the gentleman's time. Any objection? Chair hears none. You have another minute.
1 minute. Okay. Banning Democrat chairmanships. Over 80% of Republican primary voters voted in March that they wanted to see this policy take place. It is the only legislative priority, if it is one of them, that will be guaranteed to receive a vote on the Texas House floor, because it will be voted on the second day of the legislative session. All of these other policies need to actually go through a committee process. And then here's the other problem. When it comes to your sex ed issues, when it comes to whether or not teachers can talk about sex with students in the classroom at 1st and 2nd and 3rd grade, school choice, the equal parenting that we've been talking about, equal parenting was chaired by a liberal Democrat from Dallas, that committee that heard that policy. All of your education policy is in that. The eminent domain reform that we've talked about that is not going to be a legislative priority but is on the list to be considered, that was also sent to a committee chaired by a Democrat last session. So if we give Democrats the ability to decide the policy on eminent domain, all of our public education, equal parenting, then really we shouldn't be surprised that none of these policies become law. And so that's just one thing to consider. Thank you.
Any questions, please?
Luke, thank you for your work. I appreciate what you do in your videos that we watch all of the time. My question is, whenever you're talking about the licensed therapists, and we all realize we're not writing legislation here, but we're looking to inform our legislators, are you talking about rescinding or removing the licenses that have been given these therapists by the state of Texas?
Yeah, so it might be as simple as just making sure that the language says that we believe legislation should stop the sexual transition of children from birth to 18, because that would also make sure that it applies to the therapy they receive, and then to the point that the list talks about cross-sex hormones and stuff, but it doesn't talk about the psychological therapy. So I think restricting the psychologist's ability to do that as a Texas psychologist.
I'm going to go over here and then please.
There was a gentleman last night who spoke on this subject. Hello. His last name might have been White. He said that there was a term for conditioning children and transitioning them called social transitioning.
Yes.
Is that correct? Is this kind of what you're referring to?
Correct.
So stop socially transitioning our children also?
Yeah, so that all is involved. What happens is a parent, maybe one of their son wants to wear a dress, or he likes certain things they think, and so they take him to a psychologist. The psychologist asks him 5, 6, 7, 8 questions, and then they decide, hey, Tommy actually might be a girl, and I am now willing to work with him on a weekly basis to start the transitionary process, which requires a coming out birthday party as a different sex and all these other things. But Texas has protected those psychologists. We have licensed them and given them permission by the state of Texas to do that with thousands of children. And so there are far more children being transitioned that way than are actually having their puberty blocked, which happens later in the process.
So first I wanted to say that I like your wording, stop sexualizing Texas kids. I do too. Very well said. Yeah. Secondly, I have a question about, I agree that we don't want the social transitioning of kids. We don't want counselors helping kids think they might be, one gender when they're biologically another. But let's say we have parents legitimately concerned that their child is confused and they're Christian and they want to go to a Christian counselor to help that counselor sort that out the right way from a biblical perspective. How could we differentiate the two so that one would be acceptable and the other would not?
Because as long as the language is regarding gender modification or sexual transition, you're really specifying there's not a Christian counselor. I would hate to be the Christian counselor before the throne of God that actually told a little boy to become a little girl. So I think the point would be that the process of helping a child deal with gender confusion is not gender modification, it's not sexual transition. That requires you to actually believe that we could turn this child into the opposite sex.
Thank you.
Real quick, we're looking at the election integrity bill, obviously. And so to cut down confusion for those who it's going to be passed on to, would you feel comfortable adding the closed primary into that part instead as compared to just having it as a separate issue, if we could word it correctly?
Yeah, I think that would be a huge benefit. And for all of us who work very hard in these primaries, it's difficult when you have 6, 7, 8% of voters that we know are Democrats. It makes it a lot harder to get the right Republican elected in the process.
Luke, you're right in the middle of this all the time in the legislature, but I have a hard time understanding why Republicans would want to have Democrat committee chair leaders when they know you're going to kill half the bills we put up. Can you elaborate on that any?
Well, I do think you have seen a lot of movement on this issue. It was an issue that Republicans hadn't even talked about 2 years ago, and I do think that you're seeing now dozens of Republican legislators saying, hey, I've heard you, my voters, on this issue, and we're going to take a different action on it. So I think that there's a lot of positive momentum there.
Good. We'll go here, then the corner, and then back there.
Is Speaker of the House that assigns the chairmanships, is that correct?
That is correct.
And all you got to do is look at the Speaker of the House as we've had the last several times, and that's how they become Speaker of the House, is by negotiating with the Democrats to vote for them, and they in turn get chairmanships, and that's how they become Speaker of the House. Correct?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Right here in the corner, and then we'll go.
I also really appreciate your phrase, stop centralizing school kids. We're having worked with the legislature. There we go. Is there any other messaging that you think is necessary, and also messaging to avoid in getting legislation like that passed? For example, grooming seems to have been good messaging in Florida. Abuse seems to have been good messaging. Anything else, pro or con?
No, I think you're on the right track. I think you've got the words to use. That especially ones that make leftists crazy and talk more about the issue, because the more they talk, the better our position seems to become.
Another question.
Luke, Scott, I want to thank you for bringing up closed primaries. When I usually work races in parking lots in Harris County, and what I see consistently year after year is the Democrats like Sheila Jackson Lee, and they always tell their voters that come to vote for them, don't vote for me. Go save Sarah Davis. Go save this horrible person that we're trying to get out of office. I'm wondering if this is just a Harris County problem, or are you seeing it statewide in your races?
Yeah, I would say it's actually even a bigger problem in the rural areas, because if you're a Democrat in Harris County, you still feel like you're getting to elect people of power. But if you're a Democrat in some of these rural counties that are 80% Republican, you assume that every elected official is going to be a Republican. Therefore, most of the Democrats in those rural areas that are highly engaged just in their communities are almost all Republican primary voters, because their point is we'd rather go in and make sure that the most liberal option in the Republican primary is the one that gets elected.
Luke, I have one more follow-up to that. Do you foresee the legislature, unless it is one of our priorities, is that our only shot at passing this, closing the primaries?
Yeah, I think they'll probably fight it because a decent amount of them are there because of the Democrats that voted, but it still matters for the Republican Party.
Another question?
As you probably know, Luke, Senator Bob Hall had a bill about closing primaries a couple of sessions ago. It got absolutely no support, tragically. And the part that's frequently overlooked is, well, crossover voting, as you were mentioning, but the more important part is it purges voter registration rolls. In the states where they've enacted such a law, it's withstood court challenge.
Go ahead, and then one final after that.
Real quick, can we stricken the name Sheila Jackson Lee from the record? Just a comment on the whole closed primary thing. I'd be really interested to see what the delegates of this convention think about a closed primary. I don't know if we make that the top 8 or top 15. I mean, but that'd be interesting. I'm glad to hear that come up.
Remind us again what the percentage was of the voters about the Democrat chairs.
Yeah, I think it was a little over 81%, I believe, statewide that voted to say that they wanted the practice of awarding Democrat chairmanships ended in the Texas House specifically.
Very good. Thank you for your testimony, and Mom would be proud. Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, with respect for the time of all the people who have come to testify, I know a lot of people are very passionate about their subjects and they would benefit from additional time. For people who are testifying on one matter, I'd recommend that we use additional time very sparingly. But for people who have multiple things to talk on, that's when we should employ extra minutes.
I appreciate that. Just a encouragement to the committee. Chair calls James Cullison, and Rebecca Parma is on deck.
SD1, James Cullison. Thank you for having me. I'm going to be a little tough with you today. I see you folks as marketers and branders. I see myself as a spammer. You have your handouts there, which are postcards that we make to go door to door and recruit people into our party clubs, into our events, to come to our precinct conventions. We also put a report out after the session is over, whether or not the legislative priorities made it through, and if so, how well they made it through. I am here to encourage you very strongly to think about the topic of each item. The name that you give each item is the brand that there are going to be grassroots people carrying forward. If you name an item gender modification, you're going to send it to the 9,000 delegates, whether they approve or disapprove of gender modification. Is that the question you want the delegates to have in their brain, or would you rather them to read, do you approve of banning child gender modification? This seems like a simple idea, but it's difficult to do. You have to word each one in the same way so that as the delegates go down the list, they can say, yes, yes, this is great. It's the same for the voters. We want to bring people out for November. We want people to understand these are our priorities. This is what helps define us to the swing voter, to the weak Republican that only understands November voting, never been in a primary. Make the names positive. Make the names tell a positive story, and make the names something that when you read it, if you're a Republican at heart, you can say, yes, I like that, I agree with that. Don't make the names backwards. If you make some names backwards and some names forwards, it causes confusion. You end up having conversations about, are you guys in favor of gender? What? That's the simple point. The bigger point, though, is think about these things not just in terms of we're giving these to the delegates, we're deciding among activists what we really care about. Think about them in terms of, can we have a red wave? Can we have the presidency in 2024? Texas is the leader here.
Very good. Thank you, sir. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for your...
Appreciate you.
Members, with that, I want to remind everybody just that every question we ask takes time, again, just to give us that we manage that. Chair calls Rebecca Parma with Kelly Perry on deck.
Chair and members of the Legislative Priorities Committee, my name is Rebecca Parma, and I am a delegate from Senate District 14 and the Senior Legislative Associate at Texas Right to Life. Grace is handing out something for y'all, but we absolutely agree that abolishing abortion must continue to be a priority for the Republican Party of Texas. That is straightforward. But the current language being considered in this committee so far has been too broad. We must be specific in the language of this priority to direct our state legislature for what exactly we want and expect from them. That is why we're encouraging the addition of the language in the red box on the handout that's coming around. To be specific about the action and the enforcement of our pro-life laws that we want to see from the legislature next session. The specific additions clarify that as we ban abortion in our state, we must ensure that our pro-life laws are actually enforced and that we prioritize the flourishing of Texas women, children, and families. Our pro-life laws are powerless if they cannot be effectively enforced. Already we have district attorneys here in Texas who have publicly said that they are intent on not prosecuting those who violate pro-life laws if and when Roe v. Wade is overturned. The language of your priority so far will not push the legislature to adopt effective tools to go around these lawless district attorneys. The Texas Heartbeat Act uses a private cause of action that has enabled the law to remain in effect, withstand dozens of lawsuits, and save thousands of lives. The effectiveness of the civil enforcement in this law highlights why this type of enforcement should be extended to all pro-life laws and policies in Texas. We cannot rely on public prosecutors to enforce our laws, and so civil enforcement is the prudent and appropriate solution to ensure our laws that ban abortion are actually being followed as intended and saving lives. We want Texas to be abortion-free, but with that, we also must make Texas fully pro-life. We have a list of those specific policy recommendations that Texas Right to Life is making for the platform. But as a party, right, we all value innocent human life. That's a core principle for us. And as this legislative priority declares that, it also must outline what specific tools and expectations we have for the next legislative session. Thank you for your time. Happy to take any questions.
Appreciate it. Question?
Hi there. Thank you for speaking with us. Real quick, since we do have these top 10 so far, the top 15, we are going to drill down on the language, so nothing is 100%. But can you give me an example, or at least can you send us language that you would like to see in here that's clear and concise? It needs to be really short and really.
Yeah, absolutely. It's we have some language we'll make sure to send to y'all that just clarifies these things of we want to build a fully pro-life Texas and we want our laws to be enforced.
If you can send that to us as soon as possible, because we're going to really start getting to that language soon.
Okay, great.
Very good. Another question?
Yes, you speak very fast, got a lot of information there, and my ears are slower. So are you addressing any other issue we've already talked about? Are you wanting to change a priority that seems to be taking a precedence here? Or are you just trying to add more clarity. I'm not sure what the goal was.
Yeah, absolutely. We're trying to add clarity because, right, the abolish abortion priority was a priority last session from the last convention, and I think it's clear for all of us we want that to stay a priority even as we're approaching a post-Roe Texas and United States. But that language is too broad as it's currently drafted, and so we want it to just be a little bit clearer so that when we head into the next legislative session, we can hold our elected officials accountable of like, these are the specific things and tools for how we want to make sure we are abolishing abortion, making Texas fully pro-life, and making sure our laws are actually being enforced.
Can you give me an example of how it's too broad or what you would change?
Yeah, so currently it says that it says something like we support fully abolishing abortion in Texas, which is a sentiment we all agree with, right? So we would encourage adding something like, and we reaffirm the civil enforcement mechanism of the Texas Heartbeat Act and want that applied to all of our pro-life laws. So something like that was a very tangible piece of language, and we'll make sure to send that to all of you, very tangible language so that we can go to our elected officials and say, abolishing abortion is a priority for your Republican delegates and your Republican constituency, and here's how we can fulfill the priority.
So I take the term civil, that is a big change really than versus what we have in there now. It's just like the heartbeat bill, the reason it's successful is because of the civil action, not having to go through DAs, et cetera. You think that's the change that needs to occur? I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So the reason that the Texas Heartbeat Act is the boldest pro-life law that was passed since Roe v. Wade is because of that civil enforcement. That's the reason it's been able to stay in effect. And as we approach a world where Roe v. Wade's irrelevant, our laws and the typical penalties we've used for administrative and civil, they're not going to work. They're not going to work in this post-Roe world. We've already seen civil enforcement work in the Texas Heartbeat Act and save thousands of lives. And so as we equip and prepare for a post-Roe world, we need to use civil enforcement like we have in the Texas Heartbeat Act in our current pro-life laws and future laws so that we can go around these lawless DAs who have already told us they don't plan to enforce our laws.
Thank you.
Question here.
And we had some questions and also ran out of time on reforming adoption and CPS systems. And so I know you could probably spend a huge amount of time explaining all of that, but just in a nutshell, I would love to hear a little bit more of your thoughts on those two areas.
Yeah, so that's an area, like as a pro-life movement, we have always cared about, right? As a movement, we care about those things, but we've been focused on stopping abortions. And so now as we approach a world where we can think more fully about what being pro-life entails, those are two of the areas we want to start focusing in. And honestly recognizing that at Texas Right to Life, that's not been an area that we've been super involved in up to now. And so we're going to be partnering with those organizations, those conservative organizations that have policy ideas and are leading the way, and just put our weight behind those of saying, you know, we support women giving birth and thriving post-birth. And if these are some of the ways of reforming adoption process and CPS, we want to get behind those actions that will help women and families in Texas flourish.
Another question.
What evidence do you have, what can we cite to show that civil enforcement has made a difference?
Yeah, well, so the Texas Heartbeat Act is the best example. Before that law took effect, there were 13 other states across our country who had passed heartbeat laws, and none of them took effect because they all used the typical criminal penalties. They all were enjoined before they ever took effect and saved a single life. So in the Texas Heartbeat Act, it explicitly used only civil enforcement, and that's why our law was actually able to take effect and stay in effect.
Right, but when you say it saved blank babies, where do we get those numbers?
Oh, yeah, of course. So the Texas Health and Human Services Commission has monthly data on how many abortions occur. And so based on those data and then seeing the trend that has decreased since the heartbeat law took effect, we can do an estimate to approximate that about 100 children are saved every day from abortion under the Texas Heartbeat Act, and then multiply that out by how many months the law's been in effect.
Okay, final question.
Thank you, ma'am, for your testimony. But my question is there data showing, we're saying that 100 Texas children a day saved by not being aborted. Is there data that shows how many of those mothers are crossing state lines to get abortions?
Yeah, that data is not available yet. The way that the state releases the data for out-of-state abortions only is released once a year, and it hasn't been released yet. And so that will be something that we obviously analyze when that comes out. Mm-hmm.
Very good. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate that. Chair calls Kelly Perry with John Van Campanile on deck.
Excuse me, y'all. I'm Kelly Perry. I am from SD19, and I am an SRAC for SD19. I'm here on border today, and it seems like just such a small word, but it is destroying our lives, and in the coming years, it will destroy our state and the United States. What is going on is so broad and so big that a normal person cannot comprehend it because you're focused on certain aspects. I want to talk to you just about crime first, and then we'll see where all this goes. In a world where they are coming in from 160 countries, and actually it's a little bit more, but we'll just say 160. Did you know that all those people are looked up in the United States of America criminal database to see if they have ever committed a crime in the United States? Now, I hope you heard that. And if they haven't, they are given money and a place to go in the United States, and a place to live, and all benefits. Now, we are not able to check their database. Hence, now we can look at our crime rate. These people are coming from very, very violent countries where life doesn't mean very much. Children do not mean very much. Our assaults, abductions, and murders are at the highest in history. Now, when I say that about that criminal database, it almost sounds stupid, but it is fact, and it's what's going on right now. Only if something, some tattoo or something brings attention to them, will they take that further. Pretty much, doors are open, we're welcoming them in. At a time, sorry. Do I have any questions?
Members, any questions?
Yes.
Please.
Brief question, probably long answer. What can we legally do as a state?
So our Constitution says very clearly, if the United States of America will not protect us, we have the right to protect ourselves. I am from a county that was one of the very first. Actually, we called every one of your counties in the whole state of Texas, and many of them joined us. We were the very first ones that filed a disaster declaration against invasion and infectious disease. And I don't know about you, but I don't trust anything with CDC, but if they want to close the border for it, I'm for it. There are so many diseases coming in our southern borders that we are not aware of. You are not. You'll hear it. You'll hear it as it grows. And then us, as Republicans, are always running after the problem to solve it, rather getting in front of it when we have the opportunity. Any more questions?
One more.
Aside from crime, can you name 3 other areas that are impacted?
Our education, you know, we've been having some real problems in our education system since we are aware of COVID and all the stuff that come out. The classrooms are exploding. They're in the 40s in a lot of areas right now. Every illegal child costs an extra $40,000 a year. It's not just Spanish anymore, guys. It is all kinds of languages. And teachers are quitting more and more and more. Opportunities for bad teachers to come in. But it's okay because you're paying for it. The federal government does not give us money. They don't pay us back for your tax-paying dollars that you did not have a choice to pay to educate those children. Economy. In our platforms, I went and read the whole thing yesterday, and I know I get cooties for that. Okay, I get kudos for that. It says that illegals cannot collect benefits. They get benefits over United States citizens. When it comes to health care, do y'all know how many people that were United States citizens that died, especially in the border regions, because COVID? They got more money for those people. They got more money. So they got the hospital beds, and the rest of them were sent home to die. That is a fact. You can look them up and see any of them. Can I hit unaccompanied minors? Somebody asked me about accompanied minors.
We have another question.
Thank you. Go ahead.
That was going to be my question. Can you
Okay.
tell us about unaccompanied minors and what that effect is, about how many numbers we're looking at in that category?
The sad part is that shouldn't even be a thing. We should not even be able to say unaccompanied minors. 4 and 5 and 6-year-olds coming over. This is the truth with a name tag attached to them and a phone number. And the processing centers were so backed up that they would pick up the phone and call the phone number, and the person would come pick them up. That was cartel, guys, on both sides of the border. Those children were sent into sex trafficking, and we paid for the processing. Our tax dollars allowed it to happen. We are the adults in the room. We are the ones that are supposed to stop that. There's no oversight for what is going on in DHS.
I have another question.
Okay.
So border immigration's probably going to be in the priorities.
Okay.
And we're going to be discussing that later today.
Okay.
So what kind of specific language would you like to see in that priority?
No unaccompanied minors. I mean, we go to jail if you leave your kid in the car, right? So why should they be allowed to come into our country walking by themselves to be picked up by anybody that there is? The criminal database? If we can't look them up in the country they came from, and that's according to our passports and everything else to come into a country legally. You don't come. And that's why they throw away their license and everything else right before they come over. They do not want to be identified. If you were a third world country, where would you send all those bad people if you didn't want to pay for them the rest of their lives? You'd send them to the United States. We welcome them.
Thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Chair calls John Van Campernal with Phil Schum on deck.
I am John Van Campernal. I'm a delegate from SD1. Have you been listening to the testimony? How many times has somebody stood here and said, I want Texas to do something because the federal government's doing something? I want Texas to do something to keep the federal government from doing something. We have a resolution out there to repeal the sunset on the Convention of States. We want Texas to lead. We want Texas to be first. How do we take care of Texas when the federal government is in our way at every single step? How do we do that? I'm not suggesting that repealing one small piece of legislation is more important than anything on the list. What I am suggesting is repealing that one little sunset is a part of the importance of everything on the list that the federal government is in our way. That's why it's on there. If you had an amendment that went back to the 1897 definition of interstate commerce as opposed to the 1938 definition of interstate commerce, we would eliminate nearly 100 federal agencies that are in your way for legislation from Texas. Texas first, guys. The way we get Texas first is to get Washington out of Texas. I'm done. Any questions?
Questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for your testimony. Chair calls Phil Shum with Paul Gregory on deck.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Phil Shum. I'm representing SD6, one of the saddest parts of Texas. I was several years ago at a conference with several epidemiologists studying diseases and their vectors, and one of the very memorable parts about that conference was a pest control expert stood up and put all the scientists to shame because he was on the front lines and he knew what was really going on. I've handed out some pictures here from front lines here in Houston. This is a local women's clinic, and from the guys, the men, the women who are there faithfully every day, they see no substantial reduction. The progress that we've made in
Sir, can you speak in your mic a little?
Sure.
There you go.
I'm saying from the front lines at this clinic here in Houston, the men and the women who are there faithfully reaching out to the aborted mothers every week, they are seeing no substantial reduction in the amount of business this clinic has. How this represents the rest of the state, I cannot speak to. I'd want to bring to your attention that the things we've done have not been enough. There is need for this to remain a priority to see it end. Secondly, I would like to quote from Romans chapter 13, verse 4, where it says, "The state, for me this is Texas, is a minister of God, an avenger who brings wrath on the one who practices evil." I'd like to advocate that the state take responsibility for this and not make it a civil individual responsibility. The state is the one to punish murder, and Texas should not shirk that. I'd like to encourage each delegate, each committee member here to support equal protection, to support the prioritization of protecting Texas children, no matter what developmental stage they're at. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Chair calls Paul Gregory with Ginger Russell on deck.
Well, I'm Paul Gregory. I reside in Senate District 7. I want to talk about two items. Is that all right to do? Okay. First of all, I want to talk about the need to close our primaries. We had previously passed Legislative Plank 222, and that reads, "Closed primary, we support protecting the integrity of the Republican primary election by requiring a closed primary system in Texas." And I'm just blown away sometimes seeing that some of our representatives function as rhinos, and I think we need to take a step to make sure that we end that. And I think that we can do that by setting and closing our primaries as a legislative priority, and only allow members of the Republican Party to vote for Republican nominees. Our primaries are a way to open primaries are a way to destroy a party and its meanings. Closed primaries should be a legislative priority in Texas. And the second thing I wanted to talk about is that the Convention of States initiative will sunset in the near future, and I want to set that as a priority also, that we extend the Convention of States initiatives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Any questions? I have one question here.
Real quick. What would closing the primary entail? Would you have to declare you're a Republican 2 years, 5 years? What?
The voter would just have to designate their party.
Well, they do that now, so what's the difference? In other words, I go up to vote, I designate my party. What's the difference?
I would believe it's just formally saying that you're either going to be a Republican or you're going to be a Democrat or you're going to be an independent. And then that, once you've said that, you wouldn't be able to vote in the Republican primary if you were a Democrat, or vice versa. We wouldn't be able to vote in the Democrat primaries.
Can somebody clarify? Because that's what we have now. Right now, if you go and you vote in the
Okay, we got another right over here on the right.
I think I can maybe answer that question. I went to law school in New Jersey, where you have to declare when you register if you're a Republican or a Democrat. And then, exactly, I got back to Texas as soon as I could. And then at various times, you know, over years, you could change it if you changed your party affiliation, but you had to declare it. You couldn't declare it at the time you showed up to the primary. It had to be declared prior to that. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yes. Thank you.
I believe that's the answer.
Very much.
Another question real quick?
Yeah. I have folks that come and they point that they are a Republican, they vote in our primary, but then in the general election, they vote whoever they want. How is this stopping that particular action? Or what suggestion do you have to stop that action? Because that's where whoever mentioned who should not be named with the last name of Jackson.
Strike.
Anyway, but I mean, so it's the same situation, but we're doing nothing except for adding some verbiage or something to something that.
Well, in the general election, they're going to be able to vote however they like, but I'm just recommending that we close the primary so we can strengthen our Republican nominees. Because if somebody comes in and just decides I'm going to vote for the weaker Republican, knowing that when the general election comes around, then they can vote, you know, their Democratic choice that would have a better chance than, say, the Republican candidate. So,
Well, our situation is we are, the county that I'm in, we are 90-10 for Republicans. So the Democrats, basically, if they vote Democrat, they're not going to vote in any local election. So they vote Republican and then turn around and vote Democrat. I still am unclear on how we can change that by doing a party affiliation.
well, we would just close it down. Well, they didn't have the right to do that. If they put themselves as they were Democrat, they're not going to be able to come in and vote in the Republican primary.
Well, they can always just say they're a Republican, and then the general, they just turn around anyway. So, I mean, you can't legislate people lying.
Right. We have, I believe right now we have open primary, open general, and the proposal is closed primary at registration. You designate, and then you will always have an open general. I mean, that's just the way the general election
just
is.
saying that's not going to change anything anyway.
I'd like to ask for a little clarification from the gentleman from New Jersey. When you had to...
Hold on.
A gentleman previously from New Jersey. From the Texan from New Jersey.
Thank you. I was born in Fort Worth. And
the Texan from New Jersey.
3 years in New Jersey.
When you were in New Jersey and you had to register your party affiliation, could you go back and register as a different party any time, or was it only so far before an election so that you can't just wait until the moment of?
There were times that were preset when you could change your affiliation, and it was well in advance of the next election.
Okay, so you couldn't come up to primary season and say, well, there's no real competition amongst the Dems, so I'm just going to cross over and, not that you did this, but if I'm a Dem, there's no real competition amongst the Dems, I'm just going to cross over and vote Republican because I already had my chance to register my party affiliation, and so I'm stuck out this primary if I want to jump.
Right, you couldn't just like weeks before the election change your designation now.
So you're locked into voting in that primary.
Thank you, gentlemen, for y'all's conversation.
All right, and I like to address SD 24. You're right. In your situation where it's 90% Republican, it's not going to make a difference. In the urban areas where there's big mixes, you're saying you're not going to be able to vote in your primary as a Democrat if you voted as a Republican. And so that takes that away from them, so it makes them hesitate on doing it. Your county, it may not work. For a lot of the counties, it would make a big difference, I believe.
Sir, I appreciate you getting us talking amongst each other. Thank you so much for your
very much.
testimony. Chair calls Ginger Russell. Ginger Russell with Tanya Robertson on deck.
Hey, good morning, committee. Thank y'all for being here and for serving. I'm Ginger Russell from SD7. I'm going to preface my testimony by who I am. I blew the whistle on C-Scope, the Common Core in Texas in 2013. It's been added to Plank 137 of the education and the platform. I am probably the public schools' #1 enemy. I do not advocate for public schools. I've been aware of the Marxist ideology, the CRT, the social justice change in our education system for over a decade. John Dewey and the federal government, the implementation of the federal ESSA Act that Abbott has implemented in our state has destroyed our public school system. We no longer have public school systems. We have turned that over to the state and the federal government and different grant money. With that said, I'm totally opposed to the school choice agenda. It is an avenue to rein in the only government-free choices that we have today, and that is private and homeschooling. It would put them all under the same umbrella of the Every Student Succeeds Act, which I say once again, Abbott has welcomed the federal standards into our state, and to think that he can come back and change it is just, it leaves me question. In the Every Student Succeeds Act on page 17, it mandates all education, all choices to be aligned to the same standards as laid out in the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act and the Higher Education Act. So it's just another ploy, and it's illusion to think the government's going to give us back these subsidies, which is our money, I'm sorry, without strings attached. And it's a government wants to get every student underneath the same umbrella. They want control of all students. And if you start passing these school choice measures and people start taking the funding, you're going to come with strings attached. They're going to put them under the same standards, and they're going to be under the ESSA Act. And so I am totally against school choice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? One question here.
Could you clarify your statement about what you mentioned about Governor Abbott did?
Through the,
Did we just leave the NEA?
do we,
2 weeks ago, he passed legislation that Texas left the National Education Association.
so then why did he welcome in the federal law the Every Student Succeeds Act during the Commission on Accountability?
When did he do that?
He did that in, was it 2 sessions ago?
Okay, so we've passed that now. We've recently left the National Education Association. Isn't that a positive?
That's two separate things.
Okay.
Separating from the NEA, a lot of this is smoke and mirrors. A lot of these moves, like moving out of the NEA, which I was not aware of, thank you for letting me know that, is all smoke and mirrors, because he's welcomed in the Every Student Succeeds Act through the Commission on Accountability and Assessments. And so, I mean, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much for your testimony. Members, we're going to go to 12:15, and then we're going to break for lunch. The chair calls Tanya Robertson with Calvin Russell on deck.
Hi, my name is Tanya Robertson. I'm a delegate for SD11. I've served on this state committee for one convention, and also served on this committee on the SREC since its inception. I just wanted to say that the language that you guys come up with, we found out that specific language works a lot better than general. So the more specific we can get, the better. I'm here to talk about eliminating taxpayer-funded lobbying. All of our priorities would get passed if this would happen. The last 2 sessions, we had no momentum. So here's an idea for a foot in the door. The solution is to require taxpayer-funded entities, government entities like Commissioners Court, ISDs, and cities, that their lobbyists register with the state for reporting purposes. Right now, these lobbyists don't have to register. They fly under the radar, and they wine and dine our lawmakers, and we don't get our priorities passed. My second issue is eliminating or axing property tax. I have a personal story just this past year with this issue. It is an immoral lien on private property. We should be able to own our property. And the suggested language for this one that I'm hoping that you guys will consider is plank 178. And also, I want to plug eliminating Democrat committee chairs again, because of that, a lot of our priorities didn't get passed. Any questions?
Any questions? We'll start here and we'll work down.
I don't want to ask a question. I want to supplement her speech. Last year,
give that in the form of a question, please.
I do.
Come on, Marty.
Did you know that last year my house was appraised at $139,000, and this year they went to $260,000? That's $120,000 in 1 year.
Yes, sir. We experienced.
Did you know that?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We experienced.
I yield.
Thank you, sir.
We experienced the same thing, and were pushed out of our house for that reason. Our mortgage, our tax responsibilities surpassed our mortgage last year.
Wow.
And this year, it was unsustainable. We had to get out.
SD7, you have a question?
Yes, sir. On the on banning taxpayer-funded lobbies, would you include employees of the entities as lobbyists?
Yes, sir.
Make them register?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Next.
Tanya, would you speak to that a little more about the county commissioners' courts? Because I'm not sure we understand exactly. Those lobbyists are who that are lobbying for those county commissioner courts?
Yeah, county commissioners, the ISDs, the cities, they can all hire lobbyists.
Right.
And I mean, that's okay if that's how the voters want their tax money spent, but there's no reporting, and the taxpayers don't know that their money is being spent on these lobbyists.
So are you saying even the ISDs lobbyists are not registered?
Right, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
Okay.
Question.
Thank you for the topic. How do we address contracts like here in Harris County, they contract with a vendor and then the vendor advocates?
Well, fortunately, I'm not a lawyer, so
That is a concern.
I'll leave that up to the lawyers in the legislature.
But the amount of money being spent for lobbying against taxpayers,
right,
it's a large portion of it. We're not really worried about the small rural county commissioners doing something through TAC or some of the others. It's the contracts that I see, like here in Harris County, that they're lobbying for certain things. And
Well, I don't
I
think.
don't know how you expose that other than being transparent.
Yeah, I think being transparent, doing the right thing is always the right thing. It's never wrong to do that. So we have to do it across the board, whether it's urban or rural. In rural areas, because the population is lower, these elected officials can pick up the phone and call their legislator or their executive director or chief of staff. So, you know.
Thank you for your testimony.
Absolutely.
Appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Members, it's right at 12:15, and just for everybody's knowledge, we have about 33 people who would still like to testify. So I just want to put before you that when we come back from lunch, that we do another hour and a half or so of testimony, and then we'll go into our committee of a whole discussion as we continue to narrow down these topics. Is there any objection to that? Okay, yes, please.
Mr. Chairman, what time would that put us at reconvening to the committee of the whole?
Right about 3 p.m.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and recess until 1:15. So we'll take an hour, recess till 1:15, and then we'll open it for public testimony until 3 p.m., and then we will go into our committee. Yes?
Motion to extend to 1:30?
1:30.
Well, so the committee is now going to break for lunch, and you heard a lot of testimony. And as has been the case for the last several, or last yesterday, not several days, but as of yesterday, very, very similar issues brought up. Nothing new, actually. Everything, abolition of property taxes, abolish abortion, oppose school. That was from the other day. Okay, so eliminate property taxes. The 50-50 equal parenting, talked about that earlier. The Medical Freedom Act was one of them. Repeal the no family, no fault divorce. It speaks to the 50-50 issue. But border security, I think border security was talked about yesterday as well. So everything, close primaries. I think that was the one thing that kind of stumped some members of the committee, because they didn't understand that even though if you close the primary, then they're still going to be able to vote for whoever they wish, Republican or Democrat, in the general. Yes, of course. Excuse me. That's right. But the reason you want a closed primary is because that's our time as Republicans to get the rhinos out. If you have Democrats running as Republicans in the primary, then you are essentially hamstringing yourself. In Rockwall, Texas, everybody's a Republican, which means that it's very difficult to get the rhinos out, because if I'm a Democrat, I'm going to vote Republican. One individual said, well, they're like 90% Republican, 10% Democrat, and if they want to have any influence, they're going to vote Republican. Yeah, that's right. They would have to declare themselves Republican, though. When they register to vote. There's not a lot of Democrats now that are up for that. They're proud of being Democrats. So that's the thing, and I think that got a little bit missed. So in about an hour we will be back, and they will take another hour and a half of testimony before doing other committee business, and so with that I'll break as well. So I'm hoping that you will be back with me, and hopefully get the stream going a little bit better than it has been in the past. I think we got all the bugs knocked out of it. So until then, I will see you very, very soon, about an hour and a half.